Chapter 2287. He wasn't completely grateful to his five-ringed companions for their support during Xuanyuan's difficult times. In fact, they wouldn't stick to a promise made to a dead person, even if he was once a Daluo golden immortal. But since they insisted, it must be because they saw something. Or perhaps there was a reason why they had no choice but to support him. At the same time, Lu Xiaoyi's current behavior was also very complicated. He had a deep personal friendship, and he had helped him in the past. More importantly, in the future, Xuanyuan would not be able to shoulder everything alone. They needed strong and close helpers. There was no other way except for Taoism. Therefore, carrying and hugging each other, tolerating each other's bad breath, smelly armpits, and skin diseases, and working together to move forward, this was the most tested friendship. Qi Jingtian calmed down again. Except for the aftermath of the collision of ideas and the bamboo hat who was still conscientiously looking for insects, he didn't arrange for escort Lu anymore. This guy wasn't easy to serve. It was better to stay away from him. Lu Xiaoyi's luck was strange. He had encountered two groups of Zerg red light. Previously, everyone worked together to deal with another group. Now, he heard that they found another one. It seemed that there weren't many places in the universe with insect infestations. It would be a long process, and they wouldn't appear together like now. But it was hard to say whether they could be wiped out. Therefore, the Bamboo Hat's mission was really a hot potato. It would follow him until the new era came, because no one knew how many groups would be wiped out. From this point of view, it was a good thing that Heaven's Eyes didn't assign the mission to Lu Xiaoyi. His friends started to come back one after another. After a short reunion, everyone took care of themselves. Then, they went their separate ways, except for the five-ring companions. 2 years later, the four-man team of five rings gathered again. Looking at the lively people, Lu Xiaoyi was a little depressed. So he was the only one who had encountered such bad luck? Everyone else was safe and sound, but he was the only one who was, "Why are you all okay? Am I the only unlucky one? We're all mortal. How can we tell who's better and who's worse?" Qing Xian was not polite at all. Making a move on you is the main topic. There's nothing wrong with that. Shishi's face was filled with envy. Little E, just how difficult is the immortal rock? Tell me about it. Only Smoky Terminator remained silent. His only old acquaintance had left. His former junior brother's lively figures seemed to be right in front of him, as if it was yesterday. This time, the focus of this gathering was Lu Xiaoyi, because in the past few years, more than 10 half-immortals were killed by him. The record was steadily approaching the 100th place. It was only a short distance away. There was even a real immortal among them. As Shishi listened to Qin Yu's simple description of his battle with the immortal rock, his eyes lit up. This is a good idea. Was it just a little despicable? But it doesn't matter. There's no need to talk about elegance when fighting with immortals. Why don't we practice this kind of battle technique as well? Qing Xian snorted. What's there to train? Every opponent had a different method. So how could there be a conclusion? Generally speaking, this method is suitable for dealing with demonic beasts with strong bodies. But why would it be so troublesome to deal with normal demonic beasts from the lower realm? There was one thing he didn't say, and that was that he had to kill one or more of his fellow disciples. Strictly speaking, this battle wasn't worth it, but how could the situation at that time be judged after the fact? Chong Lu was not only Xuanyuan's elder, but also the elder of the Fifth Ring region. He was currently the oldest treasure in the entire Fifth Ring region. Unfortunately, he left just like that. Did Xiao Lu leave any words before he left? Smoky Terminator was now speaking with Bu Lian's identity, so the other three could only listen obediently. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It was too intense at that time, so how could I have time to pass on my thoughts? I was fighting the immortal rock at the front, so to be honest, I didn't have time to observe the situation at the back. I was beaten very badly by the immortal rock. But before the battle began, Senior Brother said that you have to listen to me in the future. Smoky Terminator glared. Why? Even Chong Lu wasn't qualified, let alone you. Among these people, I'm the most senior, so you should all listen to me. Lu Xiaoyi revealed his true intentions. I knew Senior's sister valued seniority the most, so I wouldn't overstep it. By the way, Senior White Tiger wants you to go. It has something to say to you. Only then did Smoky Terminator know that this guy was waiting for her here, but she couldn't say anything. On the side, she interrupted. Since this matter is over, and Xiao even took revenge himself, he didn't leave us any chance. Those Taoists don't appear in the world, so there's nowhere to find them. The immortal rock is the same, so we can only go wherever we find them. Since there's nothing to do, why don't we go to the land of the Yellow Dragon? Although the matter of setting up the Tao tablets isn't urgent, it's still good to go early and see what's good about them. Then we'll find a chance to set up our own Tao and accept the challenge. This was the right thing to do, except for Smoky Terminator, who was still a little unwilling. She really wanted to kill something, but as she said, Lu Xiaoyi had already killed all the people that could be killed. The rest were people who couldn't find the right person in a hurry. She had nowhere to vent her anger, which made her very depressed. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I want to go home and stay for a while. When we go to the land of the Yellow Dragon, the situation will change, and I'm afraid we won't have time to go back. We have to leave something behind. Only then can we live up to the sect that raised us. She laughed dryly. Xiao Yi, you've killed too many people, so you're starting to be sentimental? Lu Xiaoyi looked at him and said bluntly, how long have you not returned to the fifth ring? She thought for a moment. I didn't count carefully, but at least 1,000 years? It's not that I don't want to, but I can't find the opportunity. There's always this kind of thing that hinders you, so you can't get away. He looked at Qing Xian. What about you? Qing Xian didn't hesitate. 1,583 years. Lu Xiaoyi finally turned his head, but Yin Cheng didn't need him to ask. Less than 600 years. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Look, the shortest is 600 years. In other words, it's a complete growth period of Jin Dan. How many years until the new era? If it was fast, it would take at least 1,000 years. If it was slow, it wouldn't take more than 3,000 years. To the people at home, this might be the change of a few generations, but to us, it's just the blink of an eye. Qing Xian understood something. Then let's go back. Let's go back together. Let's have some fun in the fifth ring, and leave a memento. She was interested. Okay, the interior realm half-immortals are going home to visit their families. This can be considered as returning home in glory, right? Lu Xiaoyi looked at them and said something shocking. No, not just us. Don't leave out the exterior realm half-immortals. They're all fifth ring wanderers, so we shouldn't leave them behind. Let's each inform the fifth ring half-immortals and the exterior realm half-immortals. And let's go back together. No one will be left behind. The three of them stared at Lu Xiaoyi, and their expressions became serious. This was no longer returning home in glory. Chapter 2288. In the fifth ring, a huge figure streaked across the sky, just like it had been for tens of thousands of years, firm, silent, and unchanging. The change of the epoch seemed to have no effect on them, but in fact, it was the same for every realm. The ones who were affected were the half-immortals who had the hope of taking the next step. The Foundation establishment Jin Dan could only be happy, Yuanying drooling, and the perfected lords were anxious, unable to find a way to enter. At this time, the footsteps of the new epoch had gradually become clearer. It would happen in 1,000 or 2,000 years, or at the latest 3,000 years. If a cultivator was still a perfected lord, then there was basically no hope of catching the last bus. There might be a chance for the Yang spirit, but the primordial spirit and Yin spirit could only look on helplessly. 1, 2, 3 for hurdles, and there was simply not enough time to build one's own great Tao. Therefore, without any other choice, they had to do what they had to do. Even though there was no hope, they still did not know it and desperately rushed forward. If they went crazy and even their original rhythm was disrupted, then the gains would not make up for the losses. Cultivators, the most important thing was self-awareness. Most people knew this in their hearts. The fifth ring was still thriving and full of vitality. The vast domain was the stage for the building foundation stage cultivators to show off their skills. Conflicts never ceased and fights never stopped. The competition between the lower levels of power was an eternal and unchanging rhythm. This made the young people understand early on the cruelty of the cultivation world. The gold core cultivators were a little more reserved, but they couldn't hold back their surging hearts. In this turbulent era, if they took another step forward, they would be able to come into contact with the void of the universe and enter the magnificent cosmic tide. The impact of several cosmic wars had yet to be eliminated, and everyone wanted to be qualified to participate in the next great war before it came. This was the best era, but also the cruelest era. Everyone had to find their own place and plan for their own future. They sincerely hoped that they could hold on until the arrival of the new epoch. At this time in the fifth ring, the atmosphere of cultivation had reached the highest level in history. Who knew if this was a good thing for the realm or a bad thing? The peak of prosperity was followed by a decline. The more cultivators there were, the greater the number of people sucking the blood out of a mother with 5 rings. The enormous numbers would accumulate over time. Of course, right now, no one would consider the changes that would happen in a few 100,000 years or even hundreds of thousands of years. Human eyes couldn't see that far. The children were fighting, and the older children were quarreling. It was a noisy domain, but what was revealed was incomparable confidence. On this day, the wind was gentle and the sun was bright, the sky clear and boundless. Amidst the early autumn breeze, the entire fifth ring was brimming with vitality. On the 20,000-year anniversary of the establishment of the 5 rings, the entire realm was in a state of celebration. There are even cultivators from friendly alliances who came from afar to join in this grand celebration. As a rare, super-large star region in the universe, if one were to count the years, it would be impossible to count. One would have to trace it back to the ancient times. After it had produced spiritual opportunity and had cultivators, it had changed owners many times. It was not until the appearance of the infamous Sirius star in the universe that this region appeared in front of the universe cultivation world for the first time. Therefore, it was impossible to calculate the birthday of a domain. The 20,000-year birthday referred to the moment when the domain changed its name. 20,000 years ago, after the Universe Alliance army led by Zhuizhou occupied the Sirius star, they divided the fruits of victory and renamed it. 20,000 years ago. This was a very important milestone, so a celebration was necessary. They had only held such a celebration ceremony once before during the 10,000-year celebration 10,000 years ago. The next time would be after the new era. What would happen then? Only the heavens knew. The final celebration? Perhaps. However, the fifth ring's performance in the past 2,000 years had indeed made people's eyes light up. In 2 universe wars, they had the last laugh. Not only did they protect the domain, but they also took down the Hung River realm, which was also a super-large realm, in a world-ending battle. This made people look at them in a new light, and they became one of the brightest stars in the universe 4 divisions. With such a status, when the fifth ring celebration was held, there were naturally countless guests who came to congratulate them. Almost no one from the surrounding 10 universes was left out, and those from even further away were basically perfected lords. Very few people were disappointed with this trip to the fifth ring, because this was not just a simple celebration ceremony. There were also powerful cultivation orthodoxies, showing off the fifth ring's heritage to the guests. Of course, the cultivation world's festivals would not last for just a few days. Various Dharma conferences had started many years ago and would continue for many more years. The entire cultivation world celebration would last for more than 10 years before it slowly died down. In all the 5 ring orthodoxies, the peak of the spiritual assembly level was the Xian Yuan, the 3 pure ones, and the supreme ones. It was a lively scene. No matter where you came from, no matter which school you belonged to, there would always be someone who could satisfy you. Of course, with the exception of Buddhism, there are all sorts of orthodoxies in the fifth ring, except for Buddhism. It was also because of this that some busybodies called this place the Holy Land of Taoism. It was a mix of respect and flattery, and everyone was bustling with activity. It was a grand occasion for cultivation in the Eastern Elephant Heavens. For the sake of fun, the 5 Ring Summit, which was held once every 300 years, was also held during this period. However, it was no longer limited to the five rings, but more like the Eastern Elephant Summit. This was not a joke, but something determined by strength. The five rings were the peak of the cultivation world's cultivation world, and this gave them such confidence. The summit was held at the dome, Xuanyuan's mountain gate. This was not fought for by the swordsmen, but by the decisive battle against Sirius 20,000 years ago. Because the five rings tradition was not to hold the summit outside space, but within the atmosphere, the intention was that everyone could participate regardless of their cultivation level. Therefore, it was a sea of people, and tens of thousands of heads were gathered. Guandu, Changjin, and Qing Yangzi looked at the grand occasion from afar and sighed. How many five rings cultivators had sacrificed in exchange for this? They really hoped that the golden age would last forever, and that time would stop, forever frozen in this moment. This was practically the peak of a realm, right? For a notorious bandit star to be able to make it this far. It was truly the heavens that were blind. Just as the three of them were sighing, they suddenly felt something strange in the sky. There was an unusually strong aura stirring up the clouds. This was not an adjective. Someone was really stirring up the clouds. The clouds in the entire five rings began to change violently, but there was not a trace of madness outside. It was just the clouds gathering, dispersing, and combining. Qing Yangzi frowned. What's going on? Are the people outside all dead? Someone is stirring up trouble outside space, and there's not even a message coming back? The five rings was such a big event, so it was impossible for there to be no preparations outside space, especially for the five rings, which was on the brink of war all year round. The grander the occasion, the more power there would be outside. Xianyuan, Supreme, and three pure ones had dozens of perfected monarchs protecting them outside, and there were even several peak yang gods among them. How could there be no movement at all, and the entire realm's winds and clouds be directly controlled by someone? Just as they were about to react, countless clouds had finished gathering, forming a line of large words in the sky. The five rings' 10,000 flowers birthday. Wanderers return home to celebrate. Below were the names of their subordinates: Lu Xiaoyi, Qing Xian, Shi, Yin Cheng, Gu Jia, Lin Bai, Fang Zhouzi, Ting Xie, Yi Fangshi, Zhong Yuanhua, Chu Bai, Zhou Xing. For a moment, the entire five rings fell into a frenzy, and deafening cheers resounded through the clouds. There were so many thighs that they did not know which to hug. The four-man team of interior experts of the fifth ring had long been separated by the crowd. In such an occasion, they had no choice but to lower their status and enjoy the fun with the crowd. Otherwise, why did they come back if they put on airs and pretended to be aloof? In fact, the world of cultivators was no different from ordinary mortal families celebrating together for several generations. It was not easy to meet each other, and when they met again, it was already a new era. Things had changed, and people had changed, so they had to cherish it. Comparatively speaking, Xianyuan had fewer people, but it was no less lively than the three pure ones, because the swordsmen were more straightforward and unbridled. They didn't attach as much importance to the difference in seniority as the old-fashioned orthodoxies. For example, the three pure ones were like a group meeting, bowing down layer by layer. On average, a perfected lord wouldn't be able to pass this stage without kowtowing 100 times. Of course, they were comfortable and willing to kowtow. The center of Xuanyuan's liveliness was not Lu Xiaoyi and Yin Cheng, because they had occasionally shown their faces on the dome and often met each other. The rare things were Ting Xie, Chu Bai, and Zhou Xing, who each had an inner and outer sword vein. The youngest one hadn't returned to the mountain for 3,000 years. Now that he was back, there was no difference between the sword vein. I hope this scene lasts forever and lives up to what I've learned in a lifetime. It's a pity that Lao Bai still doesn't want to come back. Yin Cheng sighed. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, "We're a family, so we have to be united. That's why I hate cultivators who alienate each other and do their own thing." They only show up when it's a matter of life and death. This isn't a novel. Life is short, so why not enjoy it while it lasts? Yin Chung looked at him. Shall we? Although this kind of grand occasion is indeed unprecedented, and the reunion of the five rings is also very necessary. It's a good way to boost morale and inspire people. But I still want to ask, what's the real reason why you insisted on bringing everyone back? You have to know that you're the only one in the five rings who has this kind of charisma. Don't easily use this kind of charisma to exaggerate prosperity and gloss over peace. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Let's have some fun for a few days first. It's such a good day, so don't use unpleasant things to affect this kind of atmosphere. It's not that I don't want to tell you, but senior apprentice sister, you wear everything on your face. Once your great-grandmother has a thought, the people below will let their imaginations run wild. Ah, great-grandmother's brows are tightly furrowed. Who made great-grandmother angry? No one dares to offend you in terms of strength. Could it be that there's a problem in your relationship and you've been abandoned? Yin Chung glared and was about to fly into a rage when Lu Xiaoyi hurriedly said, Stop. Look, they're coming over. They're going to pay their respects to the most senior great-grandmother in Xianyuan. Yin Chung turned around and saw three old exterior half-immortals leading a large group of Yuanying Supremes over. Their meaning couldn't be more obvious. She snorted and turned to greet them, but took the lead to bow down. Reincarnated people don't care about the previous life, only this life. When it comes to reincarnation, I think there's no need for everyone to bow to each other. It's not clear whose ancestor is. Xiaoyi, come over here. You're the lowest in seniority here. Why don't you come over and serve us? Well, everyone was in a mess. No one knew who was bowing to whom, and no one paid attention to it. They were just doing it half-heartedly. The key was this kind of atmosphere, not specific seniority. They enjoyed the process, not who was older than the other. The bustle was still going on, and it was getting more and more intense. Since each orthodoxy had bowed to each other, they also had to bow to each other. If they really bowed to each other, it would be too noisy and disorderly. It wasn't the style of cultivators. Therefore, a few of the oldest half-immortals suggested that they shouldn't mix with each other. They might as well all the half-immortals go up on stage together to receive everyone's respect. This way, there wouldn't be too much red tape. It was a good idea. Therefore, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, well, 10,000 was no longer accurate. There were already more than 1 million people. Fortunately, everyone could fly, so there was no need to worry too much about the size of the venue. 43 half-immortals stood in the air. There was only one word to describe them: domineering. It was truly a scene of prosperity. They had the demeanor of an immortal, and their figures were like immortals. This was the template of all the fifth ring cultivators. Of course, this included many guests. They couldn't help but feel enlightened. When would their own realm be so prestigious? Changjin, Qin Yangzi, and Guandu praised them one by one and briefly described their orthodoxies. The half-immortals whose names were mentioned took a step forward and received the cheers of the crowd. They bowed to each other, one after another. The momentum became louder and louder, and the cheers became more and more uniform. It was done on purpose. Lu Xiaoyi was the last half-immortal to be called. When Guandu said a word, "Next, it's Lu," there was already a landslide and a tsunami below. Glutton immortal. Chapter 2290. In Lu Xiaoyi's 3,000 years of cultivation, he had countless nicknames in different periods, with different characteristics, different occasions, and different groups of people. However, most of them were not pleasant to hear, and he enjoyed them. It didn't matter if they were unpleasant to hear. It was just a symbol, and he didn't care. But this time, everyone called him Glutton Immortal with enough momentum, but it made him feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. This was indeed not the so-called flattery, but the sincerity of all the fifth ring cultivators. Perhaps it was the hidden ambition of every cultivator, the ambition to subvert everything, especially for cultivators who grew up in a cultivation environment like the fifth ring. In the fifth ring, He had never done anything to improve his reputation, but the world was so wonderful. He had almost no legends in the fifth ring, but it was precisely because of this that he received extremely high recognition here. It was not only Xin Yuan, not only the Sword Vein, but also the various Taoist factions of all sizes. The reason was simple. His legends were all outside, in the universe, in the outer region, in other celestial bodies. People respected a person, and of course, they loved those who did not have any internal strife, but killed in external battles. Lu Xiaoyi was such an outstanding representative. Ever since he became a nascent soul cultivator, he had never had anything to do with a cultivator of the same level as him, all the way until he became a perfected cultivator and now a half-immortal. The fifth ring cultivators could only hear one kind of news. How many demigods had Lu Tixing killed? Lu Tixing had begun to slay immortals. He had truly become the fifth ring's calling card to the outside world. There was no need to make any arrangements, no need to rope him in, and no need to pressure him. He had become the only voice. The reason was very simple. The other demigods might not have gained as much as him in the past 10,000 years. There was only one reason, and there was no need to say more. He did not do anything. He drifted in the void of the universe, but after 3,000 years of cultivation, he truly became the ruler of a super realm. Thinking back to that foreign kid from 3,000 years ago who was full of reluctance, grumbling, and rubbing the itch, this situation was truly unprecedented. He did something that even Li Wuya could not do, because he did not use the sword but the momentum. The momentum was both external and internal, and everyone obeyed. Everything was going according to plan. This was his fifth ring. In the future, it would still be his universe. He seemed to be getting a little carried away. Lu Xiaoyi nudged his senior sister beside him. "Sister, pinch me." The grand event of the fifth ring that lasted for 20,000 years had finally begun. This time, there were no boundaries of Tao orthodoxies, no so-called laws that couldn't be spread to 6 ears, and no hiding between each other. Everything was open. In the entire lifetime of the million cultivators present, how many of them had ever seen a half-immortal perform magic? This time, they finally saw it, and it wasn't just one, but dozens. Oftentimes, there would be a few half-immortals performing magic at the same time, making people wish they could grow a few more ears and a few more eyes. Happiness came too suddenly, and it was unexpected. Thus, there was the distress of happiness. Which one should I listen to? It was like a poor child who grew up in a remote village and suddenly came to the most luxurious restaurant in the city for a buffet. This affliction was always with the monks, and they hoped that this affliction would last forever. Lu Xiaoyi smiled as he looked at the grand occasion in front of him. Wasn't the reason why he worked so hard for his family's happiness? What's the point of keeping those good things forever? Or should he just bury a hole and wait for the so-called fated person? That would be an extremely stupid way of doing things. How could one person's gratitude compare to thousands of people's gratitude? This was what he hoped to see, and he looked forward to the birth of more talents under this grand occasion. Because the new era had just begun, others were looking at the era before the change, but he was also looking at the era after the change. 10,000 years after the new era, the great Tao would belong to someone, and that would be the most crucial time to establish a sect. Whether or not one could take advantage of the situation, it would determine the direction of the future for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. And these seeds were all among these people. While Lu Xiaoyi was intoxicated by his wild imagination, 3 people unknowingly surrounded him. Just as he was about to run away, he was pulled back by one of them. "Where are you going? Hurry up and tell us the truth." Looking at his 3 old friends, Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. "Life is short. Why not enjoy it while it lasts? I say, what's wrong with the 3 of you? Are you feeling uncomfortable because you're living comfortably? Why do you have to get to the bottom of things that aren't the most urgent matter right now?" Qing Xian stared at him. "If it wasn't urgent, you wouldn't have summoned all the 5th ring half-immortals here. It's just a matter of a few days. Why do you have to keep it in your heart?" If you suddenly wind up dead at night, won't everyone become headless flies? Ma Lu, you really know how to talk. I won't wind up dead at night. I'll go crazy immediately. Okay? Looking at them, he knew that he couldn't hide anymore, so he had no choice but to tell the truth. I've received news. It's just ahead of the fifth ring's trajectory, and there might be an unavoidable large-scale astronomical phenomenon. If the fifth ring continues to move like this, the bounded domain might disappear. Yin Chen's eyes widened. What? Such a big matter, and you actually kept us in the dark, and you still want to enjoy it while it lasts? Lu Xiaoyi, do you have any heart at all? What astronomical phenomenon is it? What's its nature? How far away is it? How long will it last? Is it natural or man-made? Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. I don't know. It's just a vague warning. I don't know anything else. We can only look for it ourselves. Qing Xian stared at him. You're exaggerating. In the past 20,000 years, the fifth ring has never neglected its investigation of the voyage ahead. We've also experienced many collisions with large celestial bodies on the trajectory of the voyage. We've avoided all of them because there are countless fifth ring cultivators in the course of the voyage ahead of us. I don't know where your news came from, but under such circumstances, do you still think that this kind of danger is possible? Lu Xiaoyi nodded lightly. This was because of someone's warning and also because of his own intuition. It was just that his intuition was too vague, and he didn't know where the danger came from. When he had mastered more than half of the 36 innate Daos, he had gained an understanding similar to the universe. Although it wasn't that clear when he combined the two together, he took Xin Bai's warning very seriously. In the cultivation world, nothing was impossible. In the void of the universe, nothing was always smooth sailing. Qing Xian nodded. She knew this person too well. It was normal for him to be unreliable in small matters, but he had never made a mistake in big matters. The bigger the matter, the more he was like this. In that case, let's make arrangements. Half immortals will be dispatched to thoroughly investigate the trajectory ahead of the fifth ring and eliminate the hidden dangers. Shi, who hadn't spoken all this time, had a serious expression. No, not just the trajectory. We have to expand the scope. We have to raise the chain reaction of astronomical phenomena. This includes the astronomical phenomena that may affect the ship's trajectory in the future. Chapter 2291. In the void of the universe, the operation of celestial bodies and astronomical phenomena was an extremely complicated system. It was both disorderly and orderly. It was impossible to draw such a trajectory that was completely safe and undisturbed. This involved extremely complicated calculations. In the past 20,000 years, under the careful efforts of the people of the fifth ring, nothing major had happened. Occasionally, the trajectories of other celestial phenomena would be dealt with by the cultivators in advance. They would be moved away or directly blown up. They could even slightly change the trajectory of the fifth ring to a certain extent to avoid collision. As for the meteors and meteorites that were everywhere in the void of the universe, of course, they would not spend so much effort. In the past, a few perfected cultivators could directly destroy them. The most serious incident in history was just a huge comet tail. Because the range was too big, it was impossible to avoid it. Therefore, all the people of the fifth ring were mobilized. Perfected cultivators and Yuning were all involved. When the fifth ring and the comet tail collided, they dug out a big hole in the comet tail, preventing countless large and small meteorites from falling into the fifth ring. This was also something that happened 10,000 years ago. Then this time, how serious was the so-called serious situation? No one knew. If it was someone else who reminded them, they would most likely think that he was trying to mislead them. But if it was Escort Lu, then they had to take it seriously. Because of his unique ability, because of the higher and wider level of contact he had. But before this, Qing Xian began to stir up the situation again. He was already used to it. Escort Lu would ask questions, and then they would come up with solutions. I will immediately go and ask for a summary of the star map of the 100-year track. Then we will consider how to expand the range. Shishi is right. If it was a single celestial phenomenon, we would not have missed it. If there is a problem, then it must be the complicated changes in the celestial phenomena around the track. This requires a large number of people. We can leak the news in advance. After all, we rarely come back and don't know much about the situation. This kind of situation was actually not suitable to hold a meeting and announce it in public. There were many things to consider. For example, would it affect the progress of the grand occasion? Would it cause panic? Would it be fake news? If there was a mistaken judgment, then it would be a big joke. This showed that under the fearless appearance of the people of the fifth ring, they were actually in a state of fear and trepidation. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. Wasn't it normal to be worried about the base of one sect? But some people didn't think so. Just like Qing Xian and the rest, they hoped to limit the number of people who knew about it to a smaller range, instead of spreading fake news everywhere. The Fifth Ring Road was flourishing and thriving, but there were many people in the cultivation world who couldn't bear to see others doing well. They didn't dare to do anything openly, but there were plenty of people who could spread rumors behind people's backs or pass on a message. In fact, it was also to protect Lu Xiaoyi's authority in the new organization. A revolution needed a leader. Since this was unavoidable, why not choose one of their own? This was the simplest way of thinking of Qing Xian and the other two. Lu Xiaoyi could not reject them. His status was different now. No matter what he did, there were countless pairs of eyes watching him. He could no longer go back to the days when he could come and go freely. This was the price of growth. If you gain something, you're destined to lose something. His current understanding was not too deep, but one day he would deeply reflect on what he had gained but lost something more important. Was it worth it? In the circle of Fifth Ring half-immortals, the issue of the trajectory of the Fifth Ring Road began to spread. For everyone, this was not a problem at all. From the day they started cultivating, they had never worried about it. It was as if it was a matter of course, and there would be no obstacles in the direction of the Fifth Ring Road. This was not right. Even the immortal court had encountered obstacles in the process of development, let alone a mere lower realm. Soon, a consensus was reached. This was because Escort Lu's gathering this time seemed to have an ulterior motive. It was simply for this matter, and not simply for the so-called celebration ceremony. With this awareness, everything became faster because you didn't know what level of perception and existence that could kill immortals had reached. Lifespan, this time, lost to the heavens chosen. The core was that they needed to tightly unite around Escort Lu, the new revolutionary force, so that everyone could eat more easily in the new era. Thus, they began to divide the area. In the next 100 years of the trajectory of the Fifth Ring Road, a clear curve was marked, and then using this curve as the basis, a universe was expanded. In Qing Xian's words, if they could not find anything, then they would continue to expand the scope. However, doing so would use more power, and it would be difficult to completely block the news, which might cause panic to spread in the Fifth Ring Road. If it spread among the mortals, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if the Fifth Ring Road's current cultivation system was prosperous and powerful, it was impossible to take away 10 billion people. After the climax of the Dharma Development Conference, the half-immortals began to bid farewell and leave. Although they were reluctant and felt a little rushed, everyone could still understand. After all, facing the arrival of the new era, these half-immortals had a heavy burden on their shoulders. They could not ruin the important matter just because of a speech. Everyone understood the importance of this matter. Among the non-half-immortals, only 4 people were informed. Before Lu Xiaoyi and the last batch of half-immortals embarked on their journey, they needed these old cultivators to stabilize the situation. 3 pure Yangzi, Xinyuan Guandu, Wushang Changjin, and Jialan Tongyan. That's about it. I've estimated that the Fifth Ring Road's 100 years of travel distance is about a year for a half-immortal to fly normally. With this as the axis, we will expand the universe in all directions and search for abnormal celestial phenomena that might appear. Then, we will summarize and analyze to see if there is anything worth paying attention to. Listening to Qin Xian's explanation, the four old cultivators frowned. This news was too shocking, and they were at a loss. This was digging up the roots of the fifth ring road. The roots of cultivators were mortals. Without a huge base of mortals, it would be like water without roots, a tree without fate, and it would not be sustainable. What if we can't find it? Guandu pointed out the core of the problem. Qin Xian explained softly. If we can't find it, we can only expand the scope. Even if the celestial phenomena are too far away, especially the large-scale ones, they're not too fast, and it is impossible for them to hit the fifth ring road's track in this period of time. In addition, we will expand the scope of the search. Not the 100-year track of the fifth ring road, but the 200-year track. But you should know that if the distance is extended and the scope is expanded, it means that we will need more manpower, a lot of manpower. This will require the fifth ring road to make arrangements. Not only will we need to send out manpower, but we also need to stabilize the fifth ring road. We can't cause a disturbance in the mortal world just because the news is leaked. Only you can do this. Chapter 2292. Chongjin let out a long sigh and looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Your idea? Lu Xiaoyi habitually denied responsibility. It's none of my business. I was just dreaming at night and had an epiphany. I told them about it, and they believed it. Chongjin had long known about this guy's mischievous personality and couldn't ask for much. He was completely different from the wise and powerful person in the eyes of others. The real Lu Ruoxian was someone who wanted nothing more than to hide and let others do the work. But then again, it was because of this personality that everyone almost unanimously regarded him as the leader. Otherwise, if it was someone who wanted to take care of everything, big or small, everyone would be afraid that his sword vein's hands would stretch too far. The interactions between people were truly wondrous. It was as profound as the Great Tao. Chongjin thought for a moment. Very good. Dafa is right, but we have to consider more details. For example, in the hands of people, although passing it to more people might lead to the suspicion of leaking the secret. In our fifth ring, the great cultivators are still very reliable, especially those supremes who clear the obstacles for the fifth ring all year round. They have no regrets their whole lives and keep their mouths shut. Such a big matter shouldn't be hidden from them, and they are much more familiar with the surrounding weather than you guys. I think that if we let them help you guys first, you can get twice the result with half the effort. The few youngsters nodded. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. In terms of specific matters, these old foxes who had been in charge of the sect all their lives were meticulous and meticulous. Qin Yangzi also said, we also have to establish a stable communication channel. We can't just rely on people to fly. Otherwise, it will delay the important matter. I feel that there's no need for you guys to personally go out and search. Are you guys the only ones missing? Why don't you stay in the fifth ring and lead the overall situation? We also need these few people to be the leaders here. Where to investigate, which direction to suspect, which airspace to focus on. We can't just swarm like bees, right? The allocation of personnel also needs to be controlled. We have to make sure that there is a master and a subordinate, and that there is tacit cooperation. Qin Xian humbly listened to the advice. You're right. Originally, we wanted you to be the host. Guandu waved his hand. Everyone has their own responsibilities. In this kind of situation, do you think it's appropriate for us sun gods to take charge? This is the cultivation world, not the bureaucracy of seniority. We will be responsible for providing reliable manpower. Just tell us how many people you need. Also, to ensure the stability of the fifth ring, we must make an example of those who spread false rumors. In short, the matters within the void are our duties, and the matters outside the void are the world of you youngsters. Don't mix it up. Tong Yin, who had been silent all this time, smiled. Don't forget about the negative space. In theory, the positive and negative spaces were not connected to each other, but that was normal. The universe was in chaos, and the space order was also showing signs of instability. On the outside, the celestial bodies of the main worlds that had appeared had mysteriously disappeared. In fact, they had accidentally broken through the space barrier. At present, there hasn't been a situation where an anti-space celestial phenomenon has appeared in the main world, but since the main world's celestial bodies have gone, of course, anti-space celestial bodies can come. It's just that anti-space celestial bodies are rare, so it's not common. The three people from Qingxian were startled. They, the half-immortals, had not considered this matter, but these old young spirit seniors had considered it. It was truly shameful. Of course, everyone had their strengths and weaknesses. The half-immortals often stayed in the inner and outer scenic skies, so they knew very little about the changes in the main world. Moreover, most of their attention was placed on the Great Tao, so they were not as sensitive to the surrounding universe as the true monarchs of the lower realm. This was understandable. The three of them bowed to Tong Yen. This was a big matter, a very important direction. Fortunately, with the senior's reminder, they did not miss it. Yenshin fiercely stepped on a certain person who was indifferent and whose soul had wandered outside the void. Lu Xiaoyi, senior has filled in such a big loophole for you, and you're still distracted here. Only then did Lu Xiaoyi recover from his Daorel world. He was also smart and hurriedly bowed, but he was unwilling to admit defeat. What does this have to do with me? Didn't I leave it all to Ma Lu? Everyone was speechless, but Tong Yin was indifferent. Little Yi's pure nature is very rare. This is only a direction, and the possibility is actually very small. To break through the space barrier, the requirements for the size of the celestial body are very high. The bigger the object, the more difficult it is to pass through. If it's too big, it can't pass through. If it's too small, it can't pass through. Therefore, it's just filling in the gap, but not necessarily. Because of this, the plan changed again. According to the Elder's suggestion, groups of Supremes were ordered to be sent out. Knowing that this might be related to the survival of the domain, no one dared to be careless. Information transmission channels were quickly established. After all, it was only a distance of 100 years in the fifth ring domain. In fact, for cultivators, half-immortals only needed a year. For other cultivators, it would not take more than 2 or 3 years. To them, it was not a long distance. There was also the negative space. A batch of the best negative space floating rafts were used to enter the negative space along the tracks and carefully search the space. When the huge fifth ring machine started to operate, everything seemed so orderly, and unhurried. Among the 4 people of the fifth ring, Yan Cheng volunteered to participate in the search of the negative space. This was where her interest lay, and she did not want to force it. In her words, Xinyuan only needed one person to stay in the fifth ring, even if it was a useless person with nothing to do. He really was a useless person, because he did not care about anything. This was not Lu Xiaoyi pretending to be a big boss, but for this kind of decisive matter, 1 or 2 people were enough. The more people there were, the more ideas there would be. In the end, it would be a mess. With Qing Xian as the leader, and Shishi assisting from the side, he would be the spiritual leader. This was actually the best way. What was a spiritual leader? It was only a name, occasionally cheering, and not doing anything practical. This was what he was good at. The 20,000-year celebration was still going on. The higher-ups of the fifth ring domain did not leave any loopholes in this aspect, and they were very happy with the demonstration and preaching of Tao. There was no abnormality at all. However, there were also naturally sharp guests who noticed that other than the half-immortals in the fifth ring domain, there seemed to be a lack of Supremes from the top forces. Of course, this gap was quickly filled by the other sects and forces in the fifth ring domain. Because there were not many people, there were no loopholes for the time being. The celebration continued like this. Slowly, there were people who left and people who came. The joy continued, especially for the middle and lower class cultivators. The changes in the universe were too far away from them, and they did not even have the right to know. Of course, if they knew, they would not be of any use other than adding to the chaos. During the celebration, the cultivators' management of the mortal world suddenly became strict. They announced to the outside world that there were evil people who took advantage of the celebration to fish in troubled waters and loot a burning house. Of course, this was a matter of course. This was the protection of the cultivation world for the mortal world. No one would think of other aspects. Chapter 2293. A year later, Qing Xian and Shishi found escort Lu hiding in one of the countless peaks in the dome. They threw the jade scroll in front of him without any hesitation or respect. Lord Escort, this is the results of the search for the past year. Please take a look and give us some pointers. Lu Xiaoyi didn't mind at all. It was normal for people to be grumpy when they were working. You have to understand. You're here? You're here to report? You're very hard-working, worthy of recognition. Difficulties in your work? Difficulties are only temporary. You have to display your subjective initiative, face the difficulties head-on, be unyielding, and never give up. You didn't find anything? That's right. If it's that easy, what do you need us to do? Fellow Taoists, you have to deeply understand the responsibility on your shoulders. You have to shoulder the historical burden of revitalizing the fifth ring. You have to. Escort Lu chuckled when he saw two murderous gazes staring at him. Just a few words, and you have to trouble me with the entire jade scroll. Don't blame me for being bureaucratic. Just say it. Do you want to expand the search area? Qing Xian suppressed his anger. This bastard was getting more and more out of hand. Was he ordering them around like donkeys? That's right. We didn't find anything of value. This was expected because the cultivators in charge of clearing the tracks were very clear about this area. There were no abnormalities. So we all think that we should expand the search area and search deeper and wider. So we need you to add more people. I hope your so-called bad news is true. Otherwise, let's see how you explain it to the fifth ring Taoists if we mobilize so many people. Lu Xiaoyi was shameless. What I have to explain? Aren't you the one in charge? Seeing that the two were about to explode at any time, he returned to normal. Deepen and widen. I mean, we don't have to do it together. The number of people we need to add is not small. The fifth ring can feel it immediately. Just expand outwards and don't push forward. Anyway, there's no problem of running out of time. Let's figure out the problems in the 100-year track first before we talk about anything else. This was more like something a human would say. Indeed, with the track as the axis, expanding from one universe to 3 universes meant expanding the radius by 3 times. Thus, the space increased by more than 10 times. The sharp increase in manpower would not be able to hide it from the busybodies in the fifth ring. The two didn't say much and prepared to go back and start the implementation. In terms of action, Qing Xian had nothing to say, but he still left some harsh words before he left. I've marked all the special places on the jade slip. You better take a look. Everyone's perspective was different. Different people would see the same thing differently. In addition, every month from now on, I will make a copy of the astronomical situation from the universe for you. It's up to you whether you want to look at it or not. If you can't find it in the end, don't blame us for not trying our best. The two of them turned around and left. Behind them, Escort Lu was very dissatisfied. What's with your attitude, leaders? Do you think you can quit? Do you believe that After thinking for a long time, Lu Xiaoyi still could not think of anything to do with Lu Xiaoyi. He could only turn around and sigh. He picked up the jade inscribed scroll. It was really worrisome, but he knew that he could not avoid it. There was one thing that Qing Xian saw clearly, and that was Lu Xiaoyi's vision was always different from others. This wasn't entirely a problem of vision, but also the broadening of vision from mastering more Tao states. More importantly, a memory from before gave him a different way to think about problems. So, what others couldn't see, he might not be able to. Thus, his mind sank into the jade scroll. After a round of investigation, he was a little disappointed. He couldn't see anything either. They were all normal cosmic, celestial phenomena. There was no abnormality at all. Regarding these celestial phenomena, the half-immortals who came personally had a detailed introduction, including the stability of the celestial phenomena. There was nothing special about it. There was also news from the negative space, and so on. It seemed that other than expanding the scope of investigation, there was nothing else to do. He could only continue to wait. the event was still not over. As the aftermath of the arrival of a large number of half-immortals was still fermenting, no one was willing to leave. They were still immersed in the excitement of Tao. There were even cultivators who heard the news and rushed over. A few years was nothing to the yuanying of a perfected cultivator. So, the event that was supposed to slowly fade was still bustling with people. Escort Lu's concept of happy cultivation ended up shooting himself in the foot. Finally, someone noticed that something was wrong. Because a large number of perfected cultivators in the fifth ring mysteriously left, and then after a period of time, there was news that the fifth ring might be involved in a terrifying collision of celestial phenomena. Then, the news spread throughout the entire fifth ring, and even to the surrounding regions. Everyone was very depressed, even if they tried their best to guard against this. But even as strong as a cultivator, they could never control things like rumors. This was the bad habit of humans. If another deep-rooted bad habit was added to the mix, gossiping, a single spark could start a prairie fire. We can't shut them up. Moreover, too many of our people have left. The worst thing is that the next 100 years of the fifth ring's flight path are not that remote. On the contrary, it's a place where human cultivators are more active, with so many fifth ring cultivators loitering in the nearby airspace. It's inevitable that people will bump into them. With such a large number of fifth ring cultivators loitering in the nearby airspace, many regions will come over to ask if the fifth ring is going to restart the cultivation war. There's no way to explain it. Old man Chongjin complained. They couldn't be blamed for not doing their best. It was impossible for them not to do their best. This concerned the safety of the region and was a matter of great importance. To them, this was a more important and practical threat than the new era. But things like rumors could not be seen or touched. Even immortals could not do anything about it. You can't make everyone stay silent and not think about it, right? And cultivators were a group of people who were the quickest to think. Even the slightest movement could not be hidden from them. Qin Yangzi was also very helpless. This is still the more restrained when we're transferring people. There's not enough people outside. I was wondering if we should send some yuanying over. That way they won't be so conspicuous. Guandu went straight to the point. Don't be so secretive. Don't let people say that the fifth ring is petty. Let's do it big dafa. Let's do it openly and directly announce it. Our opponents are heavenly phenomenon cultivators, not humans. Can we change our strategy? This way, we can satisfy the manpower problem of the exploration team and also shut the mouths of those who spread rumors. As for the rest, mouths are on people's bodies. Let them be. The only thing we need to be strict about is to strengthen the control of the spread of the news in the mortal world. Let's not be shy. Just say that there might be a celestial body collision, but everything is under control. How messy can this kind of publicity be? They all nodded in agreement. In dealing with this matter, Guandu's straightforwardness was actually the best way. Chapter 2294. The fifth ring cultivators finally made their stance clear. Just as Guandu said, the rumors stopped. Sometimes, the more you try to hide something, the more curious people will be. When you explain the problem clearly, it is actually not a big deal. Which domain has not been hit by small meteors, planets, or meteorites in the long river of time? It was normal. Following the confirmation of the news, a large number of fifth ring cultivators began to move out to investigate all the astronomical phenomena in the airspace around the track. Some cultivators even flew further, exceeding the limit of the three sides of the universe. They paid special attention to some of the famous unstable astronomical phenomena. No one doubted it, because this judgment was made by the god in their hearts. Escort Lu, you shouldn't have stood out. Qing Xian was very dissatisfied, because as a dog-headed military advisor, he had to protect this guy's reputation. If he made a wrong judgment, the glorious image that was built up with great difficulty would be stained. People would say, Escort Lu? He's good at fighting and killing, but he might not be able to lead an era, a trend. He can't even figure out the astronomical phenomena, let alone the trend of the new era in the future. When people reached a certain status, failure would become an unbearable pain. It didn't matter to the average person, but if you wanted to lead an era and play a pivotal role in a new era where the great Tao was changing, this was very rare and precious. How could the chosen one fail? Everyone understood this principle, especially Liu Xiaoyi's friends, so the real reason why they tolerated him being lazy was that they didn't want him to personally appear in front of the public to lead this matter, because there were too many variables in the collision of astronomical phenomena. This was a kind of packaging, although there was no such thing in this cultivation world. In fact, many forces were doing this. No one was perfect. If there was a need, they could only package a perfect person, especially for someone like Liu Xiaoyi, who was full of bad habits. His friends worked very hard to package him. Truth be told, from the moment he started to gather people to return to the fifth ring, the fact that the whole thing was his idea had already been revealed to everyone. However, he was still able to keep it under wraps. However, now that the real purpose of the half-immortals returning to the fifth ring was exposed, everyone was more inclined to believe that the whole thing was led by Escort Liu. Other than him, no one else had the ability to rally people. If it was something that was destined to show his face, his friends would certainly be happy to see it happen. But if it was something that might show his butt, they would definitely stop it. So far, her buttocks had not been exposed, but her waist had been exposed. The entire search was fruitless. He was slipping towards a false alarm. On the other hand, Escort Liu had publicly admitted that the entire search was based on his own judgment without the consent of his friends. This made Qin Xian and Shi very angry. Shi stared at him. Little E, could it be that you've already realized that we may never find that so-called dangerous astronomical phenomenon? Liu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed because he did not know how to answer. In the cultivation world of the universe, similar mistakes could be found everywhere in all aspects of cultivation. Even the cultivator's own cultivation often had inexplicable deviations. If humans were like this, then there was no need to talk about the natural astronomical phenomenon of the universe. False alarms, exaggerations, panic, and in the end, they found out that it was a false alarm. Such astronomical errors were too common. For others, it was normal, but for a leader of the new era, it should not be, especially when it caused such a huge impact. Dozens of half-immortals returned, and thousands of perfected cultivators went to investigate. However, there were also people who supported Liu Xiaoyi, such as his senior sister in Guandu on this point. The swordsman's attitude was surprisingly consistent. Yin Cheng did not hesitate. What's there to hide? It was Little Yi's idea in the first place. It was his suspicion. If he guessed right, he could choose not to stand up. But if he guessed wrong, he must stand up. Xuanyuan's sword vein has never avoided his mistakes and has never changed. Qin Xian was speechless. These were two completely different categories, okay? One was for his personal sentiments. The other was for everyone's future. Forget it. There was no way to reach a consensus with the swordsman in this regard. The swordsman would be a qualified friend, but sometimes he was stubborn and did not know how to be flexible. This was the difference in ideals, the irreconcilable difference between individual heroism and team spirit. Liu Xiaoyi was puzzled. It's not worth arguing about such a small matter, right? The key is to continue the search. The results are not out yet, and you're worried about my reputation? This was the truth. Therefore, Qin Xian's choice was to increase the investment since they were already at this point. Open and above board, brazen and bold. More cultivators were sent out, and the radius of the search expanded from the three-way universe to the five-way universe. What was worse was that many friends and guests also joined in and gradually spread to the surrounding cultivation planets. To be able to make the fifth ring know such a big favor was more precious than anything else. In the following period of time, the fifth ring's matter was no longer their own matter, but the matter of all the cultivators in the surrounding space domain and even the eastern elephant sky. Countless cultivators wandered around the fifth ring's orbit, and you asked them what they were looking for? Actually, they themselves did not know. Were they looking for a celestial phenomenon that might affect the great fifth ring? a stumbling block that might hinder the fifth ring's movement. If they wanted to completely eliminate the hidden danger, then the best way was to eliminate all the celestial bodies in the fifth ring's orbit. It did not matter if there were people or not. It was best to eliminate all the celestial bodies in the universe. Only then would they be absolutely safe. Things were starting to change. Someone was manipulating public opinion. They described the fifth ring as an arrogant domain that did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Although no one said it out loud, as time passed, all kinds of dissatisfaction, disdain, and shame began to slowly grow. Countless pieces of information about the universe's celestial phenomena flooded in, and Qing Xian and Shishi were so busy that even Yin Shang had to join in to help them analyze every possibility. This was originally a private matter of the fifth ring people, but now it had stirred up a storm in the universe. This was something they did not expect. The unpredictability of the human heart could be seen from this. It was meaningless to stop it now. The only counterattack was to find that celestial phenomenon and speak with facts. The current situation was no longer just a matter of Escort Lu's face, but also the entire fifth ring's face. Was it a pragmatic domain? Or was it a domain that did not live up to its name and thought it was infallible? A celestial body that did not know its own surname because of its powerful strength? Based on the current situation, the situation was not optimistic. The people of the fifth ring dug a hole for themselves during the 10,000-year celebration and then jumped into it, and now they were filling in the soil themselves. They were about to become the biggest joke of the universe before the new era. Chapter 2295. What was Escort Lu doing? He was playing chess and chatting with Qin Yangzi and Changjin. The wisdom of an old man was a priceless asset. Lifespan was not the only thing that mattered here. Those half-immortals who had lived for tens of thousands of years were actually more focused on cultivation in the inner and outer scenic heavens. But their time in a mortal world was far less than these old young gods who had lived for 5,000 years. They were the ones who had been in life and cultivation all their lives. Lu Xiaoyi did not need anyone to teach him in cultivation, and no one could guide him. On the contrary, he gained a lot from interacting with these old young gods. It was an attitude that had been settled over the years. Qin Yangzi put down a piece and said with a smile, "That's how it is." At the beginning, it seemed very simple, but as time passed and the process developed, all kinds of strange things began to appear. You can't say that this is man-made, deliberate, but you have to admit that surrounding you, surrounding the sword vein, and surrounding the fifth ring is still that kind of deep malice. It has never changed. No matter what height you reach in the future, it will not disappear. This is the cultivation world. Chang Jin interrupted. Unless you fall, can't recover from a setback, return to being ordinary. There will be no more highlight of the past, because you will no longer be a threat to others and become an insignificant figure. Then the malice surrounding you will naturally turn into kindness. Maybe it will even help you when you are in danger. Therefore, you have no way to deal with this power. It exists in the depths of human thought. Whether it is malice or kindness, they're actually the same group of people. Amazing, right? Guan Du snorted, saying so much is actually just hypocrisy. They can't see others better than themselves, so they will definitely do all kinds of things behind your back. When you are worse than them, then you will satisfy their cheap desire to be good. The hunter will shoot the bird that sticks out. This is human nature. It has nothing to do with anything else. If you want to take this step, this is what you have to bear. You can't avoid it. Lu Xiaoyi was very serious. Actually, I don't care, even if I am condemned by everyone. Qin Yangzi snorted. We care, because you no longer represent just one person. You represent Xianyuan. You represent the sword vein. Now, it represented 5 rings. In the future, it might even represent a new power. I know you don't care, but you're no longer who you used to be. Chang Jin smiled. Packaging. This was a must. Not for anything else, but to establish a path in the land of the yellow dragon in the future. Do you think this is all about the profoundness and miraculousness of the Great Tao? That's right, that's also wrong. The concept of the Great Tao itself was the cornerstone. This was needless to say. But to build a building, there were a lot of cornerstones. If not a single cornerstone was unique, then why were there so many innate Taos? Could it only be the day after tomorrow? The quality of one's own great Tao was the prerequisite. Whether or not one could rise to the top would depend on publicity. He had to form a force. With the general trend sweeping through, everyone agrees and agrees. This is also the key to establishing the Tao. Qing Yangzi continued. The cultivation environment is developing and changing. It's not static. The reason why the 36 innate Taos were called innate Taos was because they represented nature. At that time, the cultivation world of the universe was far from that. There were only a few big cats and small cats. If you could comprehend a great Tao and fit it with nature, then you would have succeeded. It was the environment at that time that made it so. Of course, is the environment now the same as the ancient times? Cultivators have long occupied half of the world. This kind of reality will definitely be reflected in a new era. So now, nature and cultivators are equal. Chang Jin stroked his long beard. Equal means that there is the possibility of humans participating in the control. The universe is so big. No one can completely control the trend, not even immortals. But you have to admit that cultivators' hobbies, biases, and thoughts can actually be controlled. Even human cultivators are not as independent as you think. Many times, trends can often decide their thoughts. If there was such a list in the universe that could make everyone think that such a list could represent the trend of the current era, then even if the Great Tao at the top was a pile of shit, it would still have countless followers. Qing Yangzi chuckled. So, the problem comes to the problem of how to control the list. This is the power of publicity. Countless methods, overt and covert, crooked and evil, real and fake, exaggerating, elevating oneself, and belittling others, etc., are actually all for this purpose. The universe's cultivation world doesn't have such a list, but there are variations of it. That is the Tao monument in the land of the yellow dragon. You are not afraid of being criticized by everyone, but your great Tao is. If everyone rejects your great Tao, then why would the new era choose it as the foundation? There are many other choices. Chang Jin sighed. Nature takes up half, and cultivators take up the other half. The simplest way is to choose the great Tao that is compatible with nature, because they will definitely continue. For example, time, space, the 5 elements, yin and yang, etc. No one can affect these things on the list, but it also means huge competition. But the new Great Tao of cultivators is not like this. Other than the quality of the Great Tao itself, it also contains many other things. This is the reason why we must package you. You have a strong foundation. If you can be recognized by the majority of cultivators in the universe, it is natural for you to rise. So, from now on, you can't make mistakes. You have to hold yourself to the standard of a saint. You also have to reach the standard of a saint. Lu Xiaoyi was stunned. The 2 old guys used their vulgar eyes to show him the other side of the Great Tao that no one knew. But I'm really not a saint. If I have to choose, there are 10,000 or even 1,000,000 people in front of me. Qing Yangzi smiled slyly. Of course you are not a saint. There are no saints in this world. Not in the past, not now, and not after the new era. So, this is the value of what we are doing. Saints are not made. They are packaged. Tailored for you, all kinds of propaganda, bragging, exaggerating about how unparalleled your battle strength is, how immortal Peng subverts ethics, how escort Lu stands up for you. Don't be embarrassed. Only when you feel that the image created by the propaganda is you, and naturally replace it with your own body, can you be considered a qualified saint, a great founder of the Tao. Lu Xiaoyi stammered. But is packaging so easy? Just like this. Chang Jin laughed loudly. This is not a problem. Of course, for the safety of the fifth ring, we will do our best to find it. Spare no effort. But if we really can't find it, then we will create one. Is it very difficult? Chapter 2296. Escort Lou was completely defeated by these two shameless old fellows. You have to admit that what they said was very reasonable. In fact, Liu Xiaoyi had been doing this all along, intentionally or unintentionally. For example, he had established his own circle of power in the inner and outer scenic skies, in the various large domains, and in the Kuan Dao meeting. However, he did this purely based on his instincts, unlike the two old fellows who were straightforward, systematic, and organized. Qin Yangzi chuckled. Don't think that we are harming you or have ulterior motives. If we want to establish ourselves in the new era, the five rings must choose such a representative. Tell me, can we choose anyone else? Qing Xian and Shi Shi, they're always lacking a little bit. Under real pressure, they can't withstand it. If we really meet an existence like Xian Peng, I don't dare to imagine the consequences, but it definitely won't be as beautiful as you. You carry the hope of the entire five rings. As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, even his chickens and dogs will ascend to the heavens. If you succeed, the five rings will fly with you. Everyone will have the best start in the new era. If you fail, then everyone will have to prepare for a hard life. When the time comes, new and old debts will be settled together. Since Li Wuya's era, do you think it will be good? Chang Jin smiled. Of course, Xiaoyi, you don't have to feel any pressure. Do what you need to do. You just need to cooperate with us when necessary. You have to be clear that at this point, you are no longer you. Qing Xian and Shishu will take over this task in the coming days. Whether we old fellows are still around or not, this is a fixed plan and will not change. Liu Xiaoyi was a little confused. After returning to his snowy peak, he began to think about the two old fellows' rotten idea. In fact, it was not a bad idea. For things like this, if you don't do it, others will do it anyway. You will suffer for no reason. Just like this incident, it was just a private matter of the five rings that did not involve other domains, but it was still pushed behind the scenes and maliciously slandered. It was this kind of mentality that caused mischief. The battle in the dark had begun long ago. It did not stop at the battle, but also at the creation of public opinion, propaganda, and slandering others. This grand meeting had allowed him to see many of the dark sides of the Tao. He finally understood that if the great Tao was no longer purely determined by nature, but also involved the participation of true cultivators like humans, then it would be impossible to avoid such filth. It also gave him a new understanding of a new era. Yes, the current universe was no longer a completely natural universe. Instead, it was a universe shared by nature and living beings. Nature was still indestructible, but living beings also possessed the ability to change certain aspects. The conservative power might represent the eternal and unchanging nature. The emerging power represented the power of living beings participating in the management of a universe. Since the power of living beings participated in the establishment of the great Tao, it was impossible to avoid the dark side. This was also a major characteristic of living beings. In fact, it was also a part of the great Tao, who said that the great Tao had to be bright and just. Light and darkness are eternal opposites. As long as light can maintain the dominant position in this cultivation world, it will be fine. This was probably the intention of the heavenly Tao to start a new era, right? The system of the past was indeed not very suitable for the rapid changes in the universe, especially after the cultivation creatures showed more and more power. What should he do? Was it still the same old me? Or go with the flow? This was a question, but he could not get the answer for the time being. The great Tao was no longer pure, but now what struck him was, should the great Tao be pure? Were the few great Tao that Liu Xiaoyi prepared completely pure? The mysteries of a universe that originated from nature and returned to nature. Did he not smuggle any personal goods? Did he not want to overturn the true cultivator's order? Others were the same, including Li Wuya. Everyone was smuggling their own goods. This was human nature. No one was innocent. They established their Tao purely for the sake of the great Tao. Then, did he smuggle personal goods for himself? That did not seem to be the case. The new great Tao that he created did not have any inclination towards himself, nor did it lean towards the sword vein or the 5 rings. He established the great Tao not for himself, not for Li Wuya, and not for the sword vein. It was for change, a brand new great Tao that could be naturally metabolized. It should be a survival of the fittest that could circulate the entire true cultivation world system, not a ripple in stagnant water. If this was considered personal goods, then why not just smuggle them? If this process was not so open and above board, and there were also people who were unscrupulous and unscrupulous, why not? After all, he was not a saint. This was the core of the matter. After thinking it through, he felt much more relaxed mentally. In fact, in the process of a cultivator's growth and establishment of their Tao, it was filled with constant doubts, corrections, negations, and conflicts of ideas. It was not about whether one's ideas were correct, but whether one could truly convince oneself. How could one be completely correct? You might think it was correct, but others might not. Cultivation was the cultivation of the heart. Correct your heart, and you would be the great Tao. On this trip home, he had a further understanding of the great Tao. It was no longer the mentality of pursuing perfection and purity. Instead, it had become more realistic and practical. In fact, wasn't the so-called new era a change that had to be made because of the rise of the true cultivation world? Establishing one's own great Tao and then leaving it to time and the vast number of cultivators to test and practice. If it was wrong, then it would be changed and a more suitable one would be chosen. Wasn't this the true meaning of why he chose to devour the heavenly tribulation and the great Tao of reincarnation? Establishing a self-perfecting system and self-correcting order would allow the universe's true cultivation world to go further and better through constant adjustments. He felt that this was his greatest contribution to the new era. Once again, he consolidated his confidence in the creation of a new great Tao. He felt that his heart was much clearer. Many things that he did not understand before were now clear to him. As for trivial matters like packaging, why should he care too much about it? He was not obsessed with cleanliness of great Tao. His Tao heart was like a piece of red-hot thick iron. It was constantly hammering through various events and various ideas. This was the process that one had to go through to become a useful steel embryo. Lu Xiaoyi had been hammering all kinds of things. It was not only on the profound theories, but also the meaning of the existence of great Tao and its help to the new world. He had finally hammered out the last of his impurities and indecisiveness. He felt that he could now go to the land of the Yellow Dragon and set up a Tao tablet. But now he still had to solve the problem of the 5th ring. Even though his Tao heart was clearer, that sense of danger did not disappear. Instead, it became clearer. Thus, he knew that all of this was not unfounded. Chapter 2297. Correcting his attitude would help him better analyze the astronomical news that came like raindrops. There were too many. You could never imagine how many astronomical stars there were around a 100-year-old track. If the radius was limited to one side of the universe, it could barely be counted. If it was magnified to 3 sides of the universe, it would be an astronomical number. Qing Xian and the others had no choice but to hand over the preliminary screening to the cultivators in the field. This was an essential step. Otherwise, not to mention the few of them, even if there were dozens or hundreds of people, they wouldn't be able to study the nature of these astronomical phenomena. Was it stable? Moving direction? Was there a possibility of changing direction? Would it collapse? Could the track of the next 100 years coincide with the track of the 5th ring? The only thing that was most feasible was that he didn't need to consider celestial bodies that were below a certain size, because this could be a matter of a great cultivator's fist and sword. They were too busy. This is harder than finding a needle in a haystack. I thought it would be a simple thing to find a celestial body that was about to crash into the track of the fifth ring, but I didn't expect that if all the factors were considered, it would be possible for all the celestial bodies to crash in. Shishi laughed. This is the universe. Everything is possible. And most of them are actually impossible. If we want to find that sliver of possibility, we have no other way but to use human wave tactics. Qing Xian shook his head. Although the recent busyness didn't make him overworked, he was still in low spirits because he couldn't see any hope. Should we change our way of thinking? Should we shift our focus from finding out where the danger is to simply wait for the rabbit to appear? Should we just wait here quietly? Our ability to destroy stars has a limit. How many celestial bodies can a half-immortal destroy? What about dozens of half-immortals? What if we add all the fifth ring supremes? Calculate the lowest destruction limit. Then we can use it as a standard to mark the celestial bodies that are larger than this limit. This will definitely be a small number. Then send people to monitor it at all times. Establish a communication channel and report it immediately. If there are any strange movements, gather people to destroy it. Shishi's eyes lit up. That's a good idea. No matter what astronomical phenomenon it is, as long as it's big enough to threaten the fifth ring, then it definitely won't be small. If such a big thing moves, it will take a certain amount of time. It will take at least a few years, enough for us to gather people to deal with it. In the void of the universe, the dangers of nature would not suddenly appear. There had to be a process, and there had to be a sign. It wasn't as if he was releasing a flying sword, where he could see it before he could see it. If that's the case, we won't have to stay in this sea of people. The rumors outside were getting more and more widespread, more and more ridiculous. It's irrational to maintain such a scale for a long time. Qing Xian made up her mind. Let's do that. But before that, since he had already sent out so many people, he might as well let them do a thorough job and mark out all the dangerous celestial bodies. I estimate that it will take another 10 years to achieve this goal, which is not an unacceptable time for us. The two of them looked at Lu Xiaoyi, and he could only nod gently. In theory, this was a good idea. They didn't have to wait here, and they could deal with any danger at any time. However, there was one thing he couldn't say, and that was, what if the danger didn't appear in the form of a collision? Qing Xian and Qing Xian went to make arrangements. It had been 5 years since they started to search for the tracks. If they had another 10 years, then 15 years was not a big problem for half-immortals and yuanying. However, Lu Xiaoyi had to consider that he couldn't tie everyone up here because of a completely baseless guess. If there was real evidence, even if it was 100 or 1,000 years, it would be worth it for his hometown. However, if it was just a guess, then the dangers of the void of the universe would never stop. After one collision, the next collision would start, and it would never end. Would everyone never leave the fifth ring, just to wait for that collision that didn't exist? This was the most rational decision. Everyone was very busy. The half-immortals were anxious to set up a monument, and the Supremes were grasping the last chance to take another step forward. What was the point of dragging everyone here? If this logic was true, then all the cultivators in the universe shouldn't come out and just wait for the possible collision of their celestial bodies. It was groundless worry. He could persist. However, he could only persist by himself. He couldn't drag the whole world with him. Dozens of half-immortals, thousands of supremes, and countless yuanying. That was not the way of cultivators. People would say, look, the people of the fifth ring are really gutsy. They don't dare to go out because they are afraid of a collision between worlds. He had to admit that those rumors and slanders still had an impact on him. It was a real impact that made him unable to do as he wished. As time passed, the information finally became concise. Small celestial bodies and small celestial bodies were all ignored. This kind of screening immediately reduced the number of celestial bodies from 7 digits to 4 digits. The cultivators who went out to investigate only reported 2 possibilities. One was that they thought there was a real danger, and the other was that the celestial bodies were big enough to threaten the fifth ring. The Fifth Ring's 2000th anniversary celebration was gradually coming to an end. There were fewer and fewer people at the conference, and some guests also began to leave. However, the majority of the people still stayed. In the end, 100 years was nothing to a great cultivator. Even if it was Yuanying, 100 years to them was like a few years to mortals. Was it too much for mortals to go to a city to study for a few years? It was just a stop in their lives. The rumors also became more and more unbearable. Everyone was guessing what the Fifth Ring was looking for. Conspiracy theories began to spread. Many people thought that the Fifth Ring was just using this as an excuse and had other motives: dominate the eastern heavens, start another cosmic war, destroy Buddhism and spread the Tao, unify the universe. There were various versions and countless plans. The more they spread, the more ridiculous they became. One could not help but admire the imagination of these people. That basically covered all the dark sides of humanity. However, the Fifth Ring itself was unmoved. Cultivators were still sent out, and the news was sent back one after another. In the process, many groups of space pirates were eliminated, and several groups of wandering insects were killed. The public security around the tracks was completely restored. No one closed their doors at night, and no one picked up lost items on the road. This was also a bonus, but it was a bit like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Lu Xiaoyi stayed at the Fifth Ring and did not move. He had also thought about whether he should personally go there. However, he quickly dismissed this idea, because even with his speed, it would take him at least a few decades to go through all the important celestial bodies. Because if you want to go and see them, you have to see them all. How can you choose which to see and which not to see? Therefore, you can only trust others. This was also the mentality of a person in high position. A person who wanted to do great things must have to control the overall situation and not do everything personally. You will die of exhaustion. Moreover, the people below you will not appreciate your kindness. Chapter 2298. Another 9 years passed. One day, Qing Xin sent a message. Found it. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He knew that this would be the case. He would definitely find it. It was just packaging. Is it arranged? Do you need me to go over and show my face? Is there a ribbon-cutting ceremony? Is there a dung thread meet and greet? Do you want to gather paparazzi from all over the world? Qing Xian was very serious. Be serious. This is to eliminate a hidden danger for the Fifth Ring. It's a very serious matter. If we don't believe it ourselves, how can we expect others to believe it? Of course you have to show your face. Dress more formally. It's best if you wear a tall hat. We'll set off tomorrow. We still need you to give us a speech. The message was sent over. It was a huge planet. There were countless galaxies in the universe. The basic characteristic was that they needed a star to provide the light source. Then, various planets would orbit around the star, either far or near, to obtain energy from the star and provide nutrients for life. This was a nameless planet in a nameless galaxy. It had no atmosphere and no spiritual vigor. Of course, there were no life forms. It was the outermost planet in the galaxy. Because of its huge size, it was not much different from the star. Therefore, its orbit was farther and farther away. It had been close to the star in ancient times. After a few million years, it had almost broken free from the star's gravitational force and became a free planet. Usually at this time, cultivators would give it a name. This planet was outside the 2 universes away from the Fifth Ring's orbit. It was supposed to be in a situation where they did not interfere with each other. The orbit was so far apart that it was impossible for them to cross paths. However, there were many talented cultivators in the Fifth Ring. There was a powerful person who calculated that when the Fifth Ring passed by this galaxy, its powerful gravitational force field would destroy the galaxy's fragile gravitational balance system. Its influence on the other small planets was limited, but it would have a fundamental impact on the outermost planet. It was like adding the last straw to a camel. The result was that this planet would completely break free from the star's shackles and be thrown out. It would be thrown in the direction of the Fifth Ring. This was because it broke free under the gravitational force of the fifth ring. In other words, a collision was inevitable. It wasn't a coincidence, but the uncanny workmanship of nature. It could be imagined that when an incomparably huge planet, although smaller than the five rings, was moving in a circle, it would be like dancing with a metal ball tied to a rope. The rope would suddenly snap, and the metal ball would be flung out at an astonishing speed. In Liu Xiaoyi's other memory, there was an expert who speculated about the extinction of life on the mother planet. The result was that an asteroid crashed into the mother planet, causing a disaster of the century. The Ice Age, the extinction of large animals, and the impact created an ocean. It took the mother planet 60 to 70 million years to recover from such a consequence. This time, the planet was not an asteroid, but a supermassive planet. If they really collided, not to mention the new era, even 10 new eras would not be able to recover. Perhaps the fifth ring would disintegrate? Such a large body was not something that could be destroyed by humans. Liu Xiaoyi found Qing Xian and asked curiously, "Ma Lu, how did you guys find this?" Very professional. This is not just passing off the fake as the real, it's passing off the real as the real. Speaking of which, according to your research, will this thing really produce the effect you said? If not, how can you prove that this thing will definitely break free? There are many experts among the paparazzi. Ordinary words can't fool them. Qing Xian looked at him and said seriously, "This is not an act. It's real. We did say that if we can't find such a hidden danger, we will arrange for one. But this doesn't mean that we can't find it. Everything about this planet is real, and it was warned by our friends from other worlds. According to them, the position of this planet has always been changing, and it is getting further and further away from the star. That's why they determined that the planet will eventually break free, but the time and conditions for it to break free cannot be determined. When the fifth ring passes by, it will definitely change the gravitational field of the surrounding space. This is also a fact. We are just not sure if this kind of quantitative change can really cause a qualitative change. But you have to admit that it is a hidden danger, right? We can't wait until the fifth ring gets close to it before we try our luck, right? So whether it's real or not, we will treat it as real. This is the principle. The safety of the fifth ring is the most important thing. So we'll just do whatever we want. A friend warned him? A legendary friend? Why do these words sound so familiar? Without seeing it personally, he had no right to speak. Liu Xiaoyi decided to talk about it. When he got there, now that things had developed to this point, he found that things were getting more and more out of his control. It was as if he had become an outsider, being pushed around by a group of people. He didn't like this feeling, but he also knew that he couldn't refuse such good intentions. As a member of this cultivation world, he had to adapt to certain things and not ignore them just because he didn't like them. Qin Yangzi was right about one thing. In certain situations, he was no longer himself. He couldn't abandon everyone's efforts just because of himself. But what he could do was to appear in such situations as less as possible. The fifth ring sent out a huge team for this operation. On one hand, it was necessary, and on the other hand, it was a show for others to see. Of course, there were countless cultivators from other regions who followed Fengjing. They were the witnesses, proving that the fifth ring people worked together as one, proving that Escort Liu had great foresight and was an indispensable mouthpiece. Escort Liu's reputation still depended on these busybodies who didn't know the inside story to spread it everywhere. After Liu Xiaoyi's simple speech, the huge team set off. His speech was a bit dry, and he couldn't fake his usual enthusiasm. It wasn't his intention to fake it. So where did the enthusiasm come from? No one blamed him, but word spread among the team that Escort Liu was modest, low-key, pragmatic, and not boastful. In short, being high-profile had its benefits, and being low-key had its benefits. As long as you wanted to praise someone, you could always find an entry point, even if you were actually a pile of shit. Not only the cultivators from the fifth ring, but also the cultivators who had been busy in the void of the universe for more than 10 years. Everyone had worked hard, and now it was finally time to reap the fruits of their labor. At the very least, after this time, they wouldn't have to run around the universe like headless flies looking for something. Although the cultivators didn't care about this little bit of time, and although the fifth ring was their hometown and they couldn't overemphasize it, searching aimlessly still felt like a waste of time. Even if there was an opponent they could have a good fight with, everyone felt relaxed. Chapter 2299. A year later, Liu Xiaoyi finally saw the so-called culprit 2 universes away from the fifth ring's track 50 years away. The reason it had become the target of public criticism was thanks to Guardian Liu. Otherwise, how could a desolate planet with no special characteristics, no special products, and no humans, which had countless such existences in the universe, without even a name, appear in front of so many cultivators? Planet Dujiao. That's the new name we gave it, Shishi said. Liu Xiaoyi was speechless. The name is not bad. It's impactful and has a violent aesthetic feeling. What I mean is there need to give such a nice name to a planet that is destined to be destroyed by you? Qing Xian was expressionless. There's no need. It's purely taking off one's pants. But if we consider the future propaganda, if the planet's name is more powerful, wouldn't it make the hero more powerful? If we name it Planet Mouse, wouldn't you become the hero who beats mice? Wouldn't it sound better? Liu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. His 3 friends chuckled at the side. Propaganda was everywhere. Only they could think of that. So he said weakly, "Since we're already here, what should we do? I'm sure you already have a plan. I'm actually just a puppet. I'll listen to whatever you say. I promise I'll be obedient and not do anything funny." He understood that there was no other way to get rid of the packaging awkwardness. The most important thing was to quickly finish the job and leave. Qing Xian explained to him, "To perfectly deal with this thing, there are 2 possible ways. The first is, we'll help it now and let Planet Dujiao be thrown out in advance. Since it's not due to the gravitational force of the fifth ring, of course it won't fly to the fifth ring. As for where it will fly to, we'll see after we throw it out." Liu Xiaoyi nodded. "Good idea. But since you only said the first one, according to Ma Lu's character, you'll definitely not choose it. Why don't you just say the second real implementation method? Is guessing fun?" Qing Xian turned a deaf ear to his sarcasm. "No, you're only half right. This is actually the opinion of the fifth ring officials. It saved time and effort, and it was the best way to show a cultivator's control over the cosmic phenomena. But then you would stand up and oppose it, because if he did that, he wouldn't know where Planet Dujiao would fly to. There were many cultivation realms nearby. No matter which one it was, it would be a disaster. Therefore, Escort Liu, who had the heart to save the world, would resolutely oppose it. Thus, we could only choose the second option, which was to break the bucket into several pieces and let them be slowly drawn back by the star due to their reduced size. This way, the myriad worlds will be safe and the universe will be harmonious. Escort Liu's reputation will definitely rise to another level." Liu Xiaoyi let out a long sigh and asked with concern, "Ma Lu, are you tired?" Qing Xian's cheeks trembled. "Tired. Very tired." Packaging wasn't scary. What was scary was packaging a shameless person into a saint. Therefore, we have decided that once this matter is over, we will go our separate ways and never meet again. Shishi added, "From now on, we'll break all ties and become strangers. We'll never meet again." Liu Xiaoyi sighed. "It seems that I have to enjoy your service this time. This is the last time, so I should cherish it." The few of them had great determination, perseverance, and goals. They had to obey the orders of the elders in the fifth ring because they were all raised by their masters. However, some of the elders' views were still different from theirs. Their understanding of the future and the Tao was different. In the fifth ring, they couldn't reject the good intentions of the elders. However, once they left the fifth ring, no one could control them. The future was like this, constantly colliding and choosing between the cunning of the elders and the pride and confidence of one's own family was actually the best path, the most balanced path. When the elders were cunning, when they should not be completely biased towards one side. They were well aware of this point, so Qing Xian and Shi did their best. Lu Xiaoyi also didn't shirk their responsibilities. They just wanted to make the elders happy. From the moment they entered the sect, these three elders had been in charge of the sect. Three pure ones, Supreme Being, Xin Yuan. Now that they were all 3,000 years old, one could imagine how old these old guys were. They didn't have much time left. Why did they have to make them unhappy in their last days? Even if they couldn't completely follow the elders' wishes, they could at least pretend in front of them, right? Let the elders finish their last journey happily and feel that they were still useful people who could use their life experience to help the younger generation. This was the show that Lu Xiaoyi and the others were acting. Not for the Tao, not for the future, just to not have any regrets. Just follow the script. Of course, not everyone could understand their deep meaning. Even the exterior and half-immortal sects didn't understand. This was just a farewell between a few young evildoers and their most respected elders. After this trip to the land of the Yellow Dragon, they wouldn't be able to see the sly smiles of these old guys anymore. It was a textbook example of shrewdness. They saluted, but it had to be said that the chosen place, planet Dujiao, was indeed an ambiguous and threatening place. One couldn't say that this was a deliberate arrangement because it was indeed dangerous, although the probability was still debatable. Out of the two plans, the first one was the simplest and most convenient. Everyone thought that this was a good idea, whether it was the people of the Fifth Ring or the large group of idlers who came to watch the show. This was not a battlefield. It was the most suitable place to watch a show. Only Escort Lu objected. His reason was righteous and stood on the moral high ground. At first glance, one could tell that he was a merciful person who would go to hell if he didn't. Oh, it was the other way around, it was me. In fact, if one thought about it carefully, this proposal was a bit pretentious. Planet Dujiao moved in a circle to help it escape the gravitational force of the stars. Because of its size, it was really difficult to control the direction. This kind of thing could only depend on luck. However, with the vastness of the universe, the stars only occupied a very small part of the space after all. Therefore, there was a high probability that after the planet flew out, it wouldn't collide with any human domain. At most, it would encounter some meteorites and meteors everywhere. In the end, it would be captured by the next strong gravitational force, and then continue to be its planet, continuing its circular motion. But what Escort Lu pursued was not a high probability, but an absolute probability. This was a kind of responsibility towards life. It was a kind of noble state of cultivation. It was an act of kindness based on an attitude of incomparable respect for all forms of life. Everyone hoped that the future ruler would be a kind person. Even if it was hypocritical, it was still good, right? Chapter 2300. Because of Guard Lu's insistence, there were many hypocrites among the cultivators. When everyone finally decided to follow Guard Lu's method to deal with Planet Dujiao, the crowd cheered. It was as if justice had finally defeated evil. Kindness had overpowered cruelty. Most of the people were here to watch the show. They were proud as if they had saved a planet. When you let the paparazzi in the universe participate, they were the best and most responsible propagandists in the universe, and they did it for free, because after they were done promoting Escort Lu, they could proudly mention that they were also on Escort Lu's side at that time. Although it was Qing Xian's first time doing packaging, she had a deep understanding of it, and there was a lot of potential to be discovered. The specific operation was secondary. Facing a planet that did not know how to fight back, there were dozens of demi-immortals, thousands of perfected cultivators, and almost 10,000 yuanying. There was a lot of time, and no one would disturb them. It was just a matter of time. A few months later, amidst the cheers of the crowd, Planet Dujiao was split into 3 pieces. With such a size, it was difficult to make them fly away from the gravitational force of the stars. Even if the Fifth Ring passed by, it would not be able to pull away the centripetal force given by nature. The problem was solved? It seemed to be solved. Qing Xian explained, although the danger of Planet Dujiao has passed, there is no smoke without fire. It is nearing the end of the era, and the universe is in chaos. Not only humans, but also celestial phenomena. Therefore, we still have to pay attention to what we need to pay attention to. The daily patrol of the fifth ring cannot be stopped. We have to increase the manpower and expand the area. However, the search this time has come to an end. There's no need to be paranoid and scare ourselves. What he said was the judgment of the demi-immortals. Cultivators could have intuition, but they could not be restricted by it. They should trust their own judgment and knowledge. For example, after nearly 15 years of tracking, they had completely figured out the distribution of large-scale celestial phenomena around the track. It was impossible for a celestial phenomenon to suddenly go crazy and crash into the fifth ring. Celestial phenomena were not humans. They would not be swayed by their emotions. They would only follow the laws of nature and would not change for millions of years. Therefore, they could be followed and could be predicted. Most importantly, it was impossible to maintain such surveillance and mobilize a large number of people to put their energy on unnecessary fears despite the end of the era. Therefore, this was the best way out. There were already some half-immortals who noticed that something was wrong, but no one was stupid enough to say it out loud. This was Escort Lu's face, as well as the entire fifth ring's face. However, just in case, the 5.5 ring immortal stage experts still left a way to contact each other in case of real danger. In everyone's opinion, there would be a process to the collision. From the eruption of the celestial phenomenon, to the activation of the celestial phenomenon, to the acceleration, to the crossing of a long distance, there would always be some time to react. It's not like a flower pot fell from upstairs. After being together for more than 10 years, there was bound to be a time for them to part. Right in the sky, everyone reluctantly said their goodbyes. Everyone knew that this might be the last time they saw each other before the new era. When they met again, things would no longer be there, and it would only increase their sadness. Cultivators were a group of people who were the most willing to let go. They didn't have any excessive reluctance to leave. In the blink of an eye, they all returned to their respective places. Before the epoch, he had to make good use of his time. The only group of half-immortals who didn't leave was the 5.5 ring group. Qin Xian looked at Lu Xiaoyi with a face of disgust. If there is no personal matter, everyone wants to go to the land of the Yellow Dragon and observe the newly erected Tao tablets. But before that, we need you to tell us the truth. According to the information you received and your intuition, has the danger of the 5.5 ring been eliminated? Lu Xiaoyi smiled mischievously. I have always been honest. The information was provided by a friend I just met. It was very vague. He said that it would be within 100 years, so I can't tell whether he was referring to Planet Duel or not. My intuition tells me that the sense of crisis hasn't disappeared. He changed his tone. Previously, I thought about it too simply. In the end, I almost turned the elimination of the hidden danger into a big mistake in the universe. Now, it seems that this kind of problem that involves the collision of realms and celestial bodies is actually very common in all the realms of the universe. Any realm can encounter it at any time. It's a natural threat that can't be deliberately prevented. Especially setting up a large number of people to patrol and protect, it is both unrealistic and clumsy. It's not the way of cultivation. Your idea of strengthening the patrols is enough. You don't need to affect other people's cultivation. Looking at his friends, he said sincerely, I remember that I told you before that I want to return to the 5.5 ring for a while to cultivate my mind. This is not hypocritical politeness. It's my true thoughts. Because the time I stayed in the sect is too short, some things are too precious. So, since I have the intention to stay in the 5.5 ring, and I happen to have some doubts about the outer space threat, why don't I just set 100 years as the limit to guard the 5.5 ring? I can also calm my mind and think about some things that are not very smooth on the path of cultivation. It's killing 2 birds with 1 stone. With me here, I think you will feel at ease, right? Go to the land of the Yellow Dragon and cause trouble. I will guard the way out for you. But I need to say this in advance. If something happens, don't think about hiding away. I don't care what you are doing, you have to dive back here. This was the good thing about getting along with these friends. They said whatever was on their minds and were not pretentious. If I could do it myself or needed help, I would never hide it. In the end, it would cause everyone to guess at each other. It was a waste of time and also a waste of affection. The basic premise was that the activation of the astronomical phenomenon required time. It was not an instant, but several months. Therefore, there was enough time to react. No matter where they were, after receiving the news, it would not take too long for them to rush over through the projection of the inner and outer sceneries. There was no need for everyone to stay in one place. When Lu Xiaoyi insisted, the other three also understood that there must be a reason. However, cultivation was still cultivation. Rationalizing time was also a part of cultivation. They understood each other's intentions. Shishi said Dafa, "That's good too. I will make a 5 hairs talisman for you. If you urgently need the 5 ring, just burn it. I will immediately know that something happened to the 5 ring. If you come back from the land of the Yellow Dragon, it will probably take less than a month. There is enough time." Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. 5 hairs talisman, what is that? Shishi was very proud. 5 hairs talisman refers to taking 5 hairs from my body to form a formation. When you burn it, I will immediately feel hot and itchy all over. The 5 hairs are the hair on my head, armpit, chest, and legs. I can't say the hair. Lu Xiaoyi was not disgusted because he was an extremely disgusting person. He only looked at the other person expectantly. "Senior sister, can you also refine a 5 hairs talisman for me? I will always keep it in my heart and feel each other's warmth." Yin Chun kicked him. "I don't have chest hair." Chapter 23:01. Everyone came to an agreement. Shishi and Yin Chong were impatient, so they immediately set off for the land of Yellow Dragon. Setting up a Tao tablet had an irresistible attraction to all cultivators. Not only did they set it up, but they also observed the great Tao of other sections. According to the exterior half-immortals who had already been to the land of Yellow Dragon, the land of Yellow Dragon was already very lively. There were no less than 10,000 cultivators gathered there, and the number was still increasing. Among them, there were only a few who had the confidence to set up a tablet. Most of them wanted to take a look first, but when they saw other people's Tao tablets, they couldn't help but give up on the idea of fishing in troubled waters. In the land of Yellow Dragon, there were no restrictions on setting up a Tao tablet. If you wanted to set it up, you could set it up. However, if your thing was too childish and superficial, they would be useless other than being scolded and destroyed your confidence. Therefore, even if there were no restrictions, the Tao tablets that had already been set up were some benchmarks. You couldn't be too lacking, right? Most of these people didn't want to leave after they came. They were prepared to wait in the land of Yellow Dragon until the new era arrived. Time wasn't a problem for these cultivators. No one would miss such a rare opportunity. News from afar said that when the era changed, there would be countless great Taos colliding. In the end, dozens of great Taos would be decided. Such a grand occasion only happened once every few million years. Not to mention participating, just being able to take a look at the scene was a blessing cultivated by the previous life. This kind of thinking was a consensus, so more and more people would gather. When the era changed, it was hard to say how many people would gather. Who would be able to stay out of it and sit in the immortal's cave? Presumably, those who could fly in the 4 symbols of the universe would all come, right? In these few thousand years, there were even some who died on the way or died of old age in the land of Yellow Dragon. They were like moths to a flame, with no regrets. Those who went now were mostly half-immortals, because they could still endure a few thousand years. As the great Tao fragments continued to collapse, the cultivators estimated that there would be perfected lords flying here. When the last few great Taos collapsed, the Yuaning would probably set off as well. How spectacular would that be? Since the beginning of the cultivation world, there had never been a true cultivation grand meeting of the universe. This was because there was no notice, no reason, and no motivation. The 4 celestial domains each did what they wanted. The gathering of a few domains was already a very impressive grand meeting. just like the five-ring heaven's birthday this time. However, the grand event of the five rings heavens this time around was also insignificant on the cosmic level. It was not even 10% of the Eastern Elephant heavens. So how could it be considered grand? This was the first time since he started cultivating. One could imagine that this would be the only time before the next era changed. There was no need for invitations, urges, temptations, rewards. There was no need for anything. Just the election of the 36 innate Taoists and the changes in the foundation of cultivation for at least the next few million years were enough to attract all the cultivators. No regrets. For a half-immortal like Yan Shishi who was able to persist until now and not rush over to this kind of super big scene, his willpower was already very strong. Qing Xian also wanted to stay in the Five Rings Heavens for a few more days. Lu Xiaoyi understood his old friend's thoughts. Firstly, he was the same as Lu Xiaoyi. In fact, the best cultivation time in the domain, the Jin Dan and Yuanying periods, was in Zhou Xian instead of the Five Rings Heavens. Secondly, he was worried that if something really happened, Lu Xiaoyi would not be able to handle it alone. The two of them returned home with the rest of the group, preparing to start the last period of their time together with their sect. I heard that in the Three Pure Ones, the old guys are trying to breed for you. Lu Xiaoyi smirked. Qing Xian felt a chill run down her spine. This was a very normal thing, but when it came to this guy's mouth, it was completely different. The principle of a cultivator's progeny was that the higher the state, the more difficult it was. There were various reasons. The essence was too strong. The fetus could not bear it. The difference between the two was even greater than the difference between the species, and most importantly, the jealousy of the heavens. Therefore, the best time for a cultivator to establish a family was during the foundation building period, which was not much different from a mortal. When it came to Jin Dan, it was much more difficult. However, with the means of cultivation, as long as the right body of dual cultivation was chosen and with some means of support, there was still a chance. When it came to Yuanying, one could only rely on the heavens to make a living. The means of cultivation were completely useless, not to mention Jinjuan, half-immortal, and Stone Man and Stone Woman. Therefore, in the world of cultivation, there were very few direct cultivator families. Most of them were collateral cultivator families. For example, the descendants of a cultivator's brothers and sisters did not seem to be that close to them. The Three Pure Ones were different. They dared to be the first in the world. Since they dared to find a dual cultivation partner for Qing Xian, they naturally had the unique heritage of Taoism. Since they had this intention, it was not entirely impossible. Treating a dead horse as a living horse? It was also a way to strengthen the connection between Qing Xian and her sect. The ancient bloodline connection sounded like a joke, but it was very practical. This was because Qing Xian had some awkward things to talk about with the Three Pure Ones. For example, he and Lu Xiaoyi were the same. They did not have a real master in their sect and were close to each other. For example, the Three Pure Ones were actually divided into Tai Qing, Yu Qing, and Shanqing. The Three Pure Ones led by Qing Yangzi were actually Tai Qing, while Qing Xian was born of Shanqing. For example, the Three Pure Ones of the universe had the intention of restraining Qing Xian. They interfered in his choice of Tao. All of these forced Qing Yangzi to consider the issue of Qing Xian's sense of belonging. After much consideration, he could only use this most ancient method to deepen the fusion between the two of them using the blood. Every family had their own difficulties, and family matters were difficult to resolve. It was the same for cultivators. This made Qing Xian very distressed and annoyed. He was conflicted with the sect arrangement, but he could not blatantly reject it. This was equivalent to rejecting the good intentions of the various sects in the sect. Now this damned Lu Xiaoyi was rubbing salt on his wound. He was really hateful. Hence, he ignored him and took it as he was venting his anger. Although he did not want to bother, Qing Yangzi did not. This Lu Xiaoyi was close to his nephew. Perhaps he could understand Qing Xian's interests and hobbies? Old or young or rough, dignified or coquettish. He had to cater to his interests to have a target range. The three pure ones had a deep foundation, a solid family background, rich resources, and minds. What kind of woman could they not find? Hence, he smiled and said, Superintendent, Qing Xian has been wandering outside for a long time. I don't know much about his temperament. You guys are brothers and know each other very well. I don't think it's good for you guys to watch my Wooloo be all alone. I wonder if Superintendent has anything to teach me in this aspect? Lu Xiaoyi grinned. Old man, I'm not sleepy anymore if you say this. Chapter 23:02. Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be serious. Old man, let me ask you. At our level, do you think it's realistic to talk about childish love? Qin Yangzi shook his head. It's not realistic. When we were young, our abilities were limited. Because we couldn't see through each other, we were curious. Because of curiosity, we explored each other. This is the so-called feelings. How can he not see through his current situation? At a glance, he knows how many sweat pores there are. How can there be any secrets? If there are no secrets, there is no curiosity, there is no interest. Lu Xiaoyi clapped and laughed. Old man, you are wise. You must have seen a lot of sweat pores when you were young, right? Then let me ask you again, do you think it's more realistic for him to go on a blind date at this age for feelings or for his descendants? Qin Yangzi laughed. Of course it's for his descendants. Lu Xiaoyi slapped his thigh. That's right. So in the end, this is actually a technical problem. Since feelings aren't involved, why are you obsessed with this? Why don't you focus on solving the technical problem of how to leave behind the bloodline? Regarding the inheritance of cultivators, you know it better than I do. The key lies in 2 points. Is the other party's support strong? Will it attract the jealousy of the heavens? It's really hard to find such a person. If you find a half-immortal, you can't avoid the jealousy of the heavens. It's destined to be futile. If you find a mortal, you don't have to worry about the jealousy of the heavens. But she can't bear it either, don't you think so? Qin Yangzi nodded his head. His words were crude, but reasonable. Under such circumstances, it was impossible to find someone that he liked so much for Qing Xian. It was an insult to the cultivators. The more realistic way was to go straight to the point and talk about the descendant of the bloodline. Do you have any ideas, Superintendent? Lu Xiaoyi smiled mysteriously and lowered his voice. There's only one type that can fulfill this condition. Demon Beast. The chassis is strong. The key is not to attract the jealousy of the heavens. Think about it. When Tian Dao sees the huge difference between the two, it doesn't matter anymore. Qin Yangzi also lowered his voice. Demon Beast? This is also a direction. The three pure ones have demon veins in this area too. But are you sure that kid can accept it? Lu Xiaoyi smirked and said, Why is the old man so stubborn? Of course, he wouldn't accept demonic beasts. But what if they were half-blooded demonic beasts and half-blooded humans? Isn't that much better? Qin Yangzi said thoughtfully, Good idea. It's worth a try. I'll have to think about it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Qing Xian seems to be impatient recently. I have to find something for him to do. Since they were friends, he had to show some concern from time to time, right? The news of the fifth ring cultivators returning to the upper realm in large numbers had also inadvertently spread. Under escort Lu's foresight, the fifth ring cultivators united as one and eliminated a huge hidden danger in the path of the fifth ring. They saved hundreds of millions of people from calamity and saved the world from danger. There were many similar news in the universe. It was not just Lu Xiaoyi, there were many others, but if you looked carefully, these people were all people who might have a place in the new era. The power behind them was also slowly building up momentum. Now was not the time for the dogs to bite each other. They were still relatively gentle and restrained. However, it was expected that with the arrival of the new era, the competition on and off the stage, both inside and outside the Tao, would become more and more intense. Until the last moment, when the heavens and earth collided. They were all building up momentum, all kinds of momentum. They parted ways in outer space. Lu Xiaoyi sincerely bid farewell to Qing Xian's cultivator and wished him well. Qing Xian felt uneasy after hearing his polite words. He did not know what this grandson had done to the old man. He regretted staying behind alone. When it came to scheming, he might not be a match for this guy. After Lu Xiaoyi returned to the dome, Guandu asked, "Little, did you come back to find a quiet place to cultivate, or do you want to take up a position and integrate into the affairs of the sect? Or do you want to preach?" He was very clear about this guy's nature. He would not be able to persist for long. It was just a kind of grinding on his own temperament. Every major cultivator would have their own way to deal with it. Some would fall into the mortal world, some would self-reflect in isolation, some would travel the universe, some would use battles to sharpen their state of mind, and so on. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi did not lack battles. He would also not go into isolation and travel a lot. Therefore, it was highly likely that he wanted to participate in the management of the sect and obtain the sustenance of his state of mind. There was no need for a main position. Who knew when he would disappear, a secondary position would be important. Now, even the headmaster of Xinyuan could not keep his heart. This kid's future was in the universe, not a single boundary. But Lu Xiaoyi's answer still surprised him. There's no need to preach, right? I have left most of my things in the sect. The rest is mainly what I have gained in the Tao state. This cannot be rushed or talked about. I can only slowly organize it into a book and explain it in the form of travel notes. I really do need a position. However, it is not in the dome, but in Xinyuan City at the foot of the mountain. I heard that Xinyuan City has a position as a craftsman deacon. I'll just take this one. Guandu listened with a confused expression. In Xinyuan City, there was one at the foot of the Blue Sky Mountain and another at the foot of the Dome of the Five Rings. To put it bluntly, it was a place for cultivators, family members, distant relatives, and close neighbors. There would always be such and such mortals seeking refuge. The yuanying of half-immortals and true immortals were actually very limited in their family. Most of them were dead, so they did not care. The main composition was from the Jin Dan. There were tens of thousands of cultivators in the dome. One could imagine that even if only a portion of them brought along their families, it was still not a small number. After 20,000 years, it was normal for them to form a city. The management of this city was purely a matter of the Xinyuan sword sect. There were a few Jin Dan in charge. A large group of foundation establishment cultivators had a clear division of labor. There was also an even larger number of Qi cultivators to assist. A set of system was formed. Because the demands of cultivators were different from those of mortals, it was very difficult for deep-seated corruption to breed, and there was also no problem of promotion. Those who came here were all people who had no bright future and were looking for a place to retire. Of course, it could not be said to be clean and just, but compared to the mortal world, it was still much better. After all, it was close to the dome. There was no space for evil. The large group of ferocious swordsmen on the mountain was also a kind of deterrence. Such a good environment was hard to find elsewhere. It was also a characteristic of the cultivation world. It could not be replicated in the mortal world. The deacons were basically old foundation establishment cultivators who were past their prime. There was one characteristic, and that was the clear division of labor. This was a tradition from 20,000 years ago. It had the intention of Liwuya. It was one of the few cities in the Five Rings that was willing to apply the limited knowledge of cultivation to the mortal world. It could also be understood that this was a city similar to the Fox Clan's world. In this place, there was also a trace of the embryonic form of a civilized city. Lu Xiaoyi was going to take on such a task. To put it bluntly, he did not care about the people. He was going to focus on making some novel things for cultivation. He wanted to see if there was anything that could be spread in the mortal world and make the lives of ordinary people more convenient. Chapter 2303. As he kept a low profile, Escort Lu became Craftsman Lu. No one knew where he came from. This kind of low profile was necessary, but it was also helpless. Otherwise, how could Xinyuan City be so peaceful? Just the little 100,000 foundation establishment cultivators would have to surround this place every day. Only a few high-level monarchs knew that he stayed in the dome, but they didn't say much. It was easy for him to ask for advice alone if he needed to cultivate. To be honest, even if these monarchs swaggered in Xianyuan City, no one would recognize them. Although the distance was very close, Xianyuan City and the Dome were two different worlds. He was introduced to an ignorant Jindan City leader in Xianyuan City. The Jindan City leader then introduced him to a group of Foundation establishment cultivators. It was so simple. There was no need for any special procedures, documents, or seals. Flying swords are their most reliable proof. Of course, the appearance still had to be changed slightly. After all, Escort Lu's voice and smile had spread throughout the universe. It was not difficult. He was lowering the dimension. In this kind of Xianyuan City, no one could recognize him as long as he wanted. But he didn't come back to pretend. At the Double 10,000 Flowers Festival, he even pretended to be an immortal. Why would he care about a quasi-cultivator city? His purpose was very clear. For the Xianyuan Sword Sect, he would organize and summarize what he had learned over the years. In the mortal world, he would settle his impetuous mentality caused by his overly intense cultivation life. He would quietly observe the movements of the 5 ring continents until the sense of crisis in his heart disappeared. The reason why he chose to be a city craftsman was that he wanted to be like the Fox Man, combining cultivation and life. He wanted to use cultivation to change life, the life of mortals. This idea sounded a bit too small, too insignificant, and too unimportant. But he believed that this was the true meaning of cultivation. He couldn't put forward such an idea now. It was too advanced. As long as the universe was full of spiritual opportunity, no one could truly understand his deep meaning. It was also the deep meaning of the formerly Wuya. But this was the trend, the true trend, the trend of ignoring the change of the era. One day, spiritual opportunity would disappear from this universe. Then, what supported the human social system would be another line of thought, the direction of science and technology. This timeline would be very long. Perhaps it would extend until he became an immortal and couldn't see the end of it. The basic time scale might be calculated in tens of millions of years. But no matter what, if he took one step now, he would take one step less in the future, and he would take fewer detours. Technology actually existed in every aspect of life, in every small and trivial place. Imperceptibly, it changed the lives of ordinary people. Unknowingly, at least in Xianyuan City, a brand new concept of quality of life was gradually taking shape and gradually spreading to the surrounding areas. When people traveled to Xianyuan City, they couldn't help but envy the various convenient living conditions here and naturally learn. This was the meaning of change. Actually, the fastest way to increase the level of science and technology was through war. However, in places where there were cultivators, the mortal world could not fight because they had the most advanced nuclear weapons, cultivators. Wasn't it overkill for a half-immortal like him to do this? A little pretentious? He didn't think so. If he didn't do it himself, what right did he have to ask others to do it? Moreover, to be honest, even if he had the strength of a half-immortal, it wasn't easy to apply the cultivation skills he knew to every bit of ordinary life. One needed to master too many skills, such as carving, casting, miniature arrays, and so on. In fact, it was a systematic project. He, Escort Lu, might not be qualified yet. He was assigned a small courtyard with 2 entrances. In Xianyuan City, where every inch of land was worth an inch of gold, only swordsman disciples had such benefits. This was a treatment that ordinary people and dignitaries had to pay a huge price to obtain. For swordsmen, this was the standard treatment. As for whether he needed servants or not, everyone had their own habits. Cultivators didn't lack this little bit of money. Although the place wasn't big, it didn't hinder his cultivation. With his current level, he didn't need to use his sword to practice. Everything was within his consciousness. This was the realm of half-immortal. Xianyuan City was the same as other big cities. It was also divided into east, south, west, north, and south. It was also divided into the rich district, the middle district, and the poor district. However, there was no cultivator district. This was because the dome had a rule that cultivators' residences must be mixed in every district of the city. This way, they could better monitor the city's abnormal changes. Lu Xiaoyi's residence was in the middle district of the handicraft workshop. It could be said that it was very suitable for his identity and occupation, except that it was a little noisy. There were a lot of shops in the front and a factory in the back. There were blacksmiths, carpenters, potters, and spinning carts. There was no idle time, 24 hours a day. But it didn't matter. This kind of noise was meaningless to him. The residence was very clean and tidy. At first glance, it was obvious that it was regularly cleaned. In this world where there was basically no heavy industry and light industry was stagnant at the level of handicraft. The sky was exceptionally blue, and the air under the snowy mountain was exceptionally fresh. Even if it wasn't cleaned for a month, there wouldn't be a layer of dust on the table. This was the original ecology. He didn't need to find servants because he didn't need to be taken care of. He had lived alone for 3,000 years. He had long become a loner. If someone was by his side, he would feel awkward. How long had it been since he had lived such a leisurely life? After fighting in the ever-changing cultivation world, having this kind of rare leisure time was also a kind of great enjoyment. He lacked this right now. Closing the courtyard door, he strolled along the bustling road. His Taoist robe was not very conspicuous, because here, Xuanyuan's Taoist robe was the standard. Looking at the streets, half of the men were dressed like this. This made him feel a special sense of belonging. His own domain, his own orthodoxy, his own city, his own courtyard. Similar habits, similar ideas, familiar local accent, pleasant smell of cooking smoke. When all these were mixed together, it was the feeling of home. Among the feelings of being at home, the most prominent one was relaxed. Thus, following the fragrance, he found a beef noodle restaurant in the restaurant. Because his sense of smell could help him find the most authentic one among the many small restaurants, the one with the most delicious taste and the freshest ingredients. Dear guest, please come in. I find you unfamiliar. Do you need me to introduce the specialty food of this restaurant? A corner of wine, a plate of meat, a bowl of noodles. Also, bring up some of your best dishes. Lu Xiaoyi found a seat by the window and enjoyed his dinner amidst the noise. Listening to the bustling streets around him, his mood became exceptionally relaxed. Actually, the essence of life should be simple, right? What surprised him was that the joy of killing the immortal Peng was actually not as good as eating a bowl of noodles here. What was the difference between the two? Chapter 2304. It wasn't mealtime right now, so there were few customers in the restaurant. Lu Xiaoyi saw that the waiter was idle, so he called him over for some questions. Actually, there was no need for him to go through so much trouble. All he needed to do was sweep his divine sense over the buildings in Xianyuan City and their general functions. However, this would lose the joy of entering the mortal world, and it would be unavoidably awkward to hear anything that wasn't suitable for children. Morality was a kind of invisible restraint. It was in every detail of a cultivator's life. If you could still maintain a certain bottom line in a situation where no one was paying attention and still treat respect for others as an instinct, then you were basically moral. There are many shops on this street. I'll list them one by one for you. Huaji Clothing Shop, Snow Mountain Ceramics, Dali Ironware, Song Yin Study Room. He looked at the customer's expression and saw that he didn't show any interest. So he continued. Liamu Family Shop, Fuguwei Silk Forge, Inchong Bill Shop, Jinli Pawn. Lu Xiaoyi smiled but didn't say anything. The waiter then changed a few more shops. West House Talisman Shop, Fourth Ring Magic Weapon, Longevity Pill Room, Little White Dao Hall. The waiter discovered that this customer seemed to be very picky. He didn't seem to be very interested in the places he reported. As a qualified food worker, he naturally wouldn't recommend other restaurants, but he still had something he was good at. Spring Arrival Restaurant, Rouge Pavilion, Fragrance of the Four Seasons, Night Song. Finally seeing the customer smile, the waiter felt disdain in his heart. After pretending for so long, wasn't it all for this? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Hearing these very lively names made him feel very close. At least this proved that he was still alive and had flesh and blood. What he was afraid of was that when his cultivation reached a certain level, he wouldn't feel any ripples in his heart when he heard these dishonest practices. That would be the tragedy of life. Right now, yes, he was still barely normal. After paying for the wine, he strolled out under the waiter's still enthusiastic and disdainful gaze. As expected, he walked towards the gathering place of the wind and moon. "Pah, what the hell?" The waiter fiercely spat. It wasn't that he hated this kind of behavior, but in this kind of place, the money he painstakingly saved for half a year might not even be enough to spend once. Lu Xiaoyi began his carefree mortal life. Of course, it was intermittent. Every 2 years, he would secretly make a trip to the outer space. He wouldn't go far, but he would do a thorough search of the airspace in front of the Fifth Ring's tracks every year. With his terrifying speed, the range he could fly to in a year was much greater than the others. A year of travel would basically cover the distance of several years on the Fifth Ring's route. This cycle repeated. He finally understood that it was useless to run too far away, because he didn't know when the astronomical phenomena would change. It would be good if it could be guaranteed for a few years. Once every 3 years, it could ensure the safety of the route for the next few years within a controllable range. This was the extremely close space of the Fifth Ring. No one dared to cause trouble here, and he could fly as he pleased. But he had also been hunted down. For example, T. Lu. Stop right there. Don't run if you have the ability. Didn't he boast that he was invincible among half-immortals? I've been pissed off at you for a long time. Come at me if you have the guts. Let's fight to the death. Lu Xiaoyi turned a deaf ear and ran as fast as he could. He was like a different person from the legendary ruthless and unparalleled escort Lu. He knew why this person went crazy. He must have been forced into a marriage by his family. Then, he found an opportunity to patrol the airspace like him, searching for any astronomical phenomena that might appear. It was best to ignore such a lunatic. This was just a coincidence. The two of them had different patterns of patrolling the airspace, so it would be difficult for them to meet again. They were both people with a strong sense of responsibility and trusted each other. So even if everyone else left, this law idiot wouldn't leave. With friends like this, there was nothing to worry about. Everyone had their own patterns of patrolling, so there was no need to stagger. Different people would have different interpretations of the same astronomical phenomenon. It was better to have some repetitions. Just treat it as a late-night car racing. In the remaining 2 years, Lu Xiaoyi slowly sorted out his achievements in swordsmanship. This was his blood, sweat, and tears. But in this big family, there was nothing he couldn't share. Just like how Xianyuan didn't hide anything from him when he first came to the dome, he wouldn't hide anything from those who came after him. Cultivation actually didn't have much to do with secret manuals. It was completely different from the understanding of mortals. This was a profession that required one to comprehend on their own. In a cultivation world like the Fifth Ring, there were many basic techniques. Everyone could come in contact with them, but there were very few who could truly walk down the path. It was all up to the individual, not someone who fell into a treasure trove and learned the legacy of senior. In terms of legacy, what legacy was more systematic, comprehensive, and profound than Xuanyuan's sect? The true legacy didn't lie in those so-called secret manuals. It was a spirit, a tradition, and a philosophy. It lay in the insights, travels, and gossip of countless swordsman seniors in this system. Those were the most important things. In Lu Xiaoyi's growth, what he liked to read the most were the insights left behind by these seniors. Interesting experiences, inexplicable feelings, and things that struck deep into one's heart. Now, it was his turn to leave these things behind. This was very important, because in the future, he wouldn't have the time to sort out these things systematically. He might as well do it now. It was also a review of his 3,000 years of swordsmanship. When he set up the Tao tablet, some things related to the truth of the heavenly Tao would be unspeakable. If someone really succeeded in becoming a celestial, then it would be even more unspeakable. This was the rule of the cultivation world. He personally felt that such a rule was meaningful. It could prevent certain forces from growing too big forever and crush the rising forces. What he did in the dome, Qing Xin must have done in the three pure ones. In fact, it was because they had a vague premonition of their own future. But Shi and Yinmu didn't have such awareness. This actually represented something that people didn't want to think about. You can't persuade them. In the remaining time, he put his energy into all kinds of whimsical small productions. Useful ones, useless ones, fun ones. He didn't have any plans for this. No one could have a specific plan for something that might happen tens of millions of years in the future. Even immortals couldn't. It was enough to just have a game mentality. Therefore, compared to his predecessor, he was a little unreliable as a craftsman deacon. No one bothered him. As long as the mayor of Xianyuan didn't have any opinions, others couldn't be bothered to have any opinions. They were just a bunch of losers whose Tao path was broken. Of course, they wouldn't be so diligent in handling official affairs. It was human nature. Chapter 2305. Lu Xiaoyi also held a small sword gathering once in a while. His target group was mainly at the true monarch level. For the Yuanying, giving them too much would instead affect their cultivation rhythm. They were already under the pressure of the new era, and they also had the guidance of a half-immortal in the sect. If they were anxious, who knew what kind of impulsive things they would do, causing harm to others and themselves? There were still some promising seeds among the true monarchs like Yin Dai, Guangming, Guangyao, Zofan, Song and so on. They were also the backbone of Xuanyuan's continuation in the main world. No matter what happened in the end, they still had a lifespan of a few thousand years, or even longer. Most people's gazes were focused on the trembling of the new era, but Lu Xiaoyi was more focused on the beginning of the new era. That trembling was the trembling of the top figures like them. For most people, the future was still long. Although the number of people after the new era might not be as large as before, if one looked at the river of time, it would definitely be the most turbulent era. There would be far more opportunities than after the new era stabilized. This was what a sect truly valued. There had to be a focus like him and Yinshan. There also had to be a comprehensive focus like this group of young true monarchs. This kind of vision was what a great sect should have. They shouldn't rely on trembling all the time, and if that didn't work, they would have diarrhea. Such days continued for 50 years. If the time when the Fifth Ring Force's search for the sea route was included, 65 years had passed since Sinbai's 100-year deadline. The influence of the Fifth Ring's 10,000-year celebration had long passed. Now, the biggest event in the universe was the land of the Yellow Dragon. There was nothing else. Even the wars between realms were rare. The universe was about to change, so who would still stupidly fight each other to the death? It entered a relatively stable period, and it was certain that it would become more and more stable. The universe was stable, but the land of the Yellow Dragon might not be. When all the high-level cultivators in the universe gathered in one place, it was obvious what would happen there. It wouldn't just be a Dao debate, there would be more violent things. Up until now, 17 innate Daos had already collapsed. There were 19 left. Seeing that they had entered the accelerated stage, 4 of them had collapsed the last time. In the future, continuous collapses like this would become common, so these 19 wouldn't be able to withstand the collapse. The location of a Yellow Dragon's land could be called the center of the universe. The 4 symbols heavens used it as the center, spreading out infinitely in the shape of a cone. Within it, there were countless realms of various sizes scattered about. Some were far from the center, while others were close. When the future era changed, those who were close to the new era would have a huge advantage. They would be able to reach the new era, and even Yuanian cultivators would be able to witness the grand occasion of the new era. However, those who were far away would not be able to do so. For people at the level of Yuanian cultivators, their lifespans were limited. They would not be able to spend thousands or even hundreds of years on the journey. The location of the fifth ring was not too far from the eastern elephant sky. If a true monarch were to fly there, it would take about 1,000 years in the main world. If it was in the negative space, it would take no more than 200 years. However, the people of the Fifth Ring Road rarely went to the land of the Yellow Dragon. This was because they were especially sensitive to the dangers and were unwilling to rush there too early. As a result, their hometown was left empty. Who knew if a certain cultivation force would use this opportunity to plot against them? In order to reassure the people, the three great leaders also specially announced that they would open an express negative space route to the land of the Yellow Dragon before the era changed. They would use the best, fastest, and largest treasure ship in the Fifth Ring Road. Moreover, there would be no charge. All expenses would be supported by the three great leaders. This was a reassuring pill. It gave countless Yuaniing true monarchs from small sects and factions a realistic hope. It would also save them from leaving early and getting lost in the void of the universe for nothing. If accidents happened, they would lose their lives before the era changed. It also ensured that the Fifth Ring Road would always be fully equipped and ready for battle. This was the way of survival for bandits. It also allowed these people to support the seated contestants of the three great leaders in the future. Of course, it was needless to say, everyone knew to support their own children. In fact, the Fifth Ring Road was not the only one to take such actions. Any realm that had a little bit of strength, a little bit of responsibility, and a cohesive force would do the same. With the wisdom of cultivators, there was no one who did not understand this simple logic. Therefore, there were very few cultivators gathered in the land of the Yellow Dragon. They all had the ability to travel through the universe, and their realms were generally at least Yang's soul. Many of them did not only come to observe, but also to establish themselves. This was the general environment. Under the calm, a storm was brewing. Once it started, the sky would change. On this day, a young Taoist came to Xianyuan City. He was dressed in the attire of a Dharma cultivator, slightly different from a swordsman. However, in the current Fifth Ring Road, not many people cared about these small differences, especially in a place like Xianyuan City. It was not the core of Xianyuan, so no matter what orthodoxy one was from, it was fine to stay or leave. Walking on the spacious and clean streets of the city, the Taoist was somewhat surprised. The Fifth Ring Road's cultivation civilization was very developed, but it was the first time he had seen a city that was so well-planned and organized. From his conversations with the locals, he learned that this was the result of 50 years of infrastructure projects in the city. It was not only the streets and roads, but also many other things. 50 years? You've been doing this for 50 years? The Taoist was somewhat puzzled. He still couldn't figure out what this had to do with the establishment of Tao in the new era. However, that guy's actions were always unexpected and unconventional. Him messing around with things that seemed to have nothing to do with cultivation was indeed in line with his personality. The shops on the streets had a dazzling lineup of goods. Even the knowledgeable Taoist was somewhat confused about the uses of some of them. He knew that guy was buried here as a craftsman. Could it be that he was the one who invented all these boring mortal things? It was very possible. He couldn't be treated as a normal person. Sometimes, he didn't quite understand how he had become friends with such a person. Could it be that he was mentally unsound? When he passed by a kitchenware shop, there were many people outside. The shop owner was doing his best to advertise. There are many strange things happening in Shueching. All the housewives love me. Let's see if I don't touch the cooking pot. The Taoist shook his head. What a common practice in Xianyuan City. How could people use the means of cultivation on these meaningless tricks? With just a glance, he knew what this was. In the Fifth Ring, cooking methods had also evolved. From the original simple and monotonous cooking to the present day, all kinds of frying, stir-frying, and frying were the most indispensable part of cooking. However, in stir-frying, it was very annoying for the ingredients to stick to the pan due to uneven heating. Of course, this was only for mortals. Cultivators only needed to use a layer of magic to stir-fry. The problem was, which cultivator would change their profession to become chef? So, this was probably the reason for inventing the cooking pot. A strange city. a strange swordsman. In fact, the key was that strange friend. The Taoist knew that this lousy thing must have been created by that guy. He didn't do anything proper. Chapter 2306. Although it was the Taoist's first time here, for a cultivator of his level, it was easy for him to find someone. After 7 or 8 turns, he arrived at a spacious workshop behind a shop. There were many people here. It seemed that there were craftsmen, chi refining, and foundation establishment cultivators. In front of a workbench, a guy wearing a leather apron was boasting. Why is it that there are people who don't touch the pot, but don't touch the toilet? This is a very complicated question. The Taoist laughed. As always, he was unconventional and would never change. This was his friend. The toilet wasn't a new thing in the 5-ring world. It was invented as early as 20,000 years ago. It had been difficult to popularize on a large scale because it had very high requirements for the construction of houses. There was also a comprehensive consideration of water, sewer, and sewage. Generally, only the rich and powerful would use it. But no matter how slow it was, it would still slowly spread because it made the toilets of the past no longer as good-looking, smelling, and looking. Humans always yearned for a better life. Today, 20,000 years later, the toilet was no longer a rare thing in large cities. It had also begun to enter the residences of tens of thousands of households. Of course, it was limited to the middle class and above, especially in Xinyuan City, where the management was strict, orderly, clean, tidy, and there was no shortage of water. The popularity of the toilet was higher than in other cities. Although it wasn't possible to install it in every household because the water and sewer systems were too complicated, it was still possible to do it in public toilets. It should be known that these things were originally stored in buckets at home and collected every morning. It had a big impact on the image of the city. The apron man nodded at him from afar and continued to talk nonsense. The most unpleasant experience in public toilets is to deal with the traces left behind by the previous guests. The solidity of their adhesion to the ceramic surface was something that even glue could not compare to. In order to avoid this embarrassment, we can study anti-ergonomic techniques. How to make the feces fall vertically into the water, but this brings about the problem of splashing water. Solving the problem of sticky feces in buckets, in addition to improving our toilet experience, has a more important significance: water conservation. I hope that you will put your rich experience and knowledge into this very meaningful creation. I've already talked about the specific direction, but it may not be comprehensive. It still needs everyone's efforts. But before that day comes, we can only continue to practice the splash holding technique. After the apron man finished his lecture, he turned to the new Taoist. Fellow Taoist, about the problem of not touching the pot, how do you solve it? The Taoist's words were sarcastic. You can poop in a pot. Laughing loudly, the man in the apron walked over and stretched out his hand. His dirty hand had already left a mark on the Taoist's clean Taoist robe. Nothing was left? Taoist robes had a self-cleaning function. The man in the apron turned to the others and shouted, "That's right, we don't have to focus on the problem of materials. We can discuss with the 3 pure ones later and ask them to make a simple cleaning array. The Taoist is the Taoist is Taoist of Taoist have a Taoist ist Taoist deist Taoistist. Taoist was hopeless Taoist. In the future, I'm afraid you'll be the only one who can patrol the skies of the 5th ring." Lu Xiaoyi was very sharp. "I alone am enough. You should have left long ago. There's no need to waste time here with me." However, I still wanted to know, was he forced to leave? Because of the request of your universe's 3 clear Tao sects? Qing Xin sighed. A person who always talked about shit and urine all day long had a terrifying intuition when it came to judging things. He only needed one sentence, and this person could guess the cause and effect. The 3 pure ones have a general plan. There is a first and a second, a master and a second, a test and a ban. 20 years ago, they came to inform me, and I found an excuse. But this time, I'm afraid I can't avoid it. If I don't go, the universe's 3 Pure Ones alliance will have opinions about the 5 rings' 3 Pure Ones. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Understood. It was a big house after all. In fact, if you ask me, you don't have to be so petty about it. I really don't have anything to do, so I'll stay here for a while longer. If there's really something important, I'll also arrange for some people to keep an eye on it. It's best if there's nothing. If there's something, we'll meet again. It's not like you can't come out just because you set up the Tao tablet. Qing Xian nodded. Your intuition, especially towards disasters, is incredible. It seems like you've never been wrong before. Actually, in my opinion, saving the mother planet is the most important thing, but it's also very practical to get some fated chances from doing this with you. Unfortunately, I'm afraid you'll have to eat it all by yourself again this time. Lu Xiaoyi laughed loudly. That's the truth. Were my abilities forced out by them in this way? My original dream was just to be a simple Dharma cultivator who could cast dazzling spells. In the end, I was forced to do this. Sigh, what a pity for my invincible talent in sorcery. Qing Xian also laughed. Then should our Dharma lineage thank these people? Otherwise, who knows what kind of disaster the Dharma cultivator circle would have become because of you. I won't be back when I leave this time. You know how to contact me. I'll just say one thing, we're all friends. Don't eat all the benefits and fated chances alone. Since you've eaten the meat, you should at least let us eat the bones and drink the soup, right? Qing Xian left. Lu Xiaoyi understood what he meant. What opportunity? It was just a joke. The important thing was that he did not have to shoulder it alone. Since he had these friends, it would be easier for everyone to bear it together. This was the meaning of friends. He didn't want to bear it alone. The key was that damn intuition and that warning. He had no clue at all. He didn't know where the danger came from and where the change would come from. When a sword fell, it wasn't scary. What was worse was the feeling of it hanging above his head. It made him uneasy and shocked. There were tens of billions of living beings. Even if he was as strong as a half-immortal, he couldn't be calm. This was a necessary sense of responsibility. There weren't many people who believed in his intuition. Qing Xian was probably the most resolute one among them. This was because they had known each other for the longest time. Their mutual trust was cultivated through countless battles. In this aspect, even senior apprentice sister Yin Chen couldn't compare. But he couldn't explain it, especially when he had spent 15 years and spent a lot of money. He had mobilized tens of thousands of people. He could only use a groundless planet duel as an excuse. Intuition and reality. When you couldn't prove your intuition with reality, no matter how hard you tried, you could only submit to reality. Now that he was here, the number of people who were going to calculate the celestial phenomena before the 5th ring doubled. This was already the best he could do. People had to live a normal life and cultivate. You couldn't use a completely illusory threat to keep everyone on edge all the time, even if he still insisted that it could happen. Chapter 2307. Lu Xiaoyi once again increased the intensity of his detection of the environment outside the 5th ring. Originally, he would stay in the 5th ring for 2 out of 3 years and go out for 1 year. Now, it had been changed to a cycle of 2 years. He would return to the mountain for 1 year and go out for 1 year. Although Lu Xiaoyi had never asked for anything, the group of young true immortals under his command also began to learn from him. 1 year of self-cultivation and the other year of exploration. Light, Radiance, Yin Dai, Song Rong, Zhou Fan, Han Dang, and more than 10 other Xianyuan Yang gods and primordial spirits were the core of the next generation of Xianyuan Sword School. They were also Lu Xiaoyi's most ardent supporters. If he dared to run naked on the dome, these people would dare to line up to follow him. To them, there was no such thing as face or hypocrisy. This was because they were different from the old guy's fixed thinking. They were the biggest beneficiaries of his sword system, Tao realm system, and cultivation philosophy. They firmly believed that Lu Xiaoyi's direction was the direction of the new era in the future. Among them, Yin Dai was the most meticulous. Based on the principle of strength in numbers, she had started a brand new cultivation course decades ago, the study of the fifth ring's trajectory. This wasn't a combat skill or a cultivation skill. It was a completely independent theory of the universe's celestial bodies that studied the trajectory of the fifth ring alone. The main point was that when large domains moved through the void of the universe, the surrounding astronomical phenomena produced a reaction force and a reaction force. This theory had an impact on the trajectory of the fifth ring. It was a purely academic topic. One could imagine how unpopular such a topic was in Xinyuan, where battle was an instinct. Almost no one participated. Only Supremes Yuanying, big and small, were there. They were mainly supporting her out of politeness because of Yin Dai's personal charm. After a few years, Yin Dai was also somewhat discouraged. This was because almost no one participated in the activities. They were just slackers who didn't do anything practical. However, she had a stubborn personality. This could be seen from her experience of climbing all the way from the lower 3 stars. Faced with such a predicament, her response was to expand the scope of the subject. Weren't Supremes and Yuanying not interested? Then let's lower the threshold and let Jin Dan cultivators have a chance to participate. This was truly a stroke of genius. For those Jin Dan who were filled with longing for the void of the universe and hated that they could not participate, they had already gained a forward-looking understanding of the void beyond the universe through various means. To their cultivation, this might be meaningless, but you could never stop a cultivator from being curious about the future and the universe. Even mortals were filled with thoughts of outer space, let alone cultivators. They were only a thin layer away from the void. Therefore, as soon as they were released, they immediately took part. Not only was it a fashion trend, but it was also the only thing they could do to help the five-ring home planet. Originally, Yin Chung had thought that if there were still no participants, she would simply open it to Foundation establishment cultivators. However, there was no need for that now. With hundreds and thousands of Jin Dan cultivators joining, her subject immediately became extremely crowded. She had no choice but to restrict the conditions for joining. For example, one's own strength must be acceptable, and it must not affect one's own cultivation progress, etc. The huge database of data was limited to these Jin Dan cultivators. That was all the airspace the five-ring had passed through in the past 20,000 years. What was the cause of the deviation in the direction of the airspace? Why did it attract those small celestial bodies? How many accidental collisions were there? What were the main factors behind this? If these things were seen by Supremes of Yuanying, they would not have any feelings at all. This was because they had long lost interest in the vastness of the void. The first few excursions were exciting enough, but after going out hundreds and thousands of times, it was like facing an old couple who had been mortal for decades. How could there be any passion left? However, the Jin Dan cultivators were different, because they had never gone out before. In front of them was a new world. It was completely unfamiliar, full of fantasies, and made people yearn for it. Even if most of them could not reach the level of Yuanying, if they could use this opportunity to understand part of the truth of the universe, it would not be a waste of their lives. Their views were incomparably childish. Their principles were unclear, their concepts were confusing, and they were full of mistakes. Listening to their discussions was completely like listening to a group of primary school students discussing calculus. However, they had one advantage, and that was their unconstrained and unconstrained thinking. They were strange and eccentric, and they were not bound by fixed views. They spread erroneous rumors that made people spit out rice, and they became a mess of chatter. The high-level cultivators simply could not tolerate it, and they did not have the time to correct their misconceptions. This was because many things could be naturally understood as long as one entered the void of the universe. However, they cannot be explained through the atmosphere. Therefore, the high-level cultivators basically disappeared, except for Yin Dai, who took out 2 hours every time to discuss with them. However, this did not affect the enthusiasm of the Jin Dan cultivators. After holding back for so many years, they finally found a window to come into contact with the universe. Even if they were enjoying themselves, they were overjoyed. The 3 great discussions every month had never been interrupted. They even wrote a general outline of the orbit of the 5 rings. This was the essence of what they believed to be infallible. In any case, they had already submitted it. Whether or not it could be of help to the 5 rings, and whether or not the seniors of the high-level cultivators would pay attention to it was another matter. On this day, the Jindan Universe Discussion Conference was completely silent. However, the silent atmosphere could not suppress the enthusiasm in their hearts. Their fanatical gazes made it so that they did not mind revealing their inner thoughts at all. This was because the conference this time was attended by the god in their hearts, Lu Hongxian. 80 years had already passed, and everything was still the same, peaceful as usual. Yindai had some matters to attend to, so she left a strange letter and asked Lu Xiaoyi to help her take care of this academic organization that had already become a paradise for Jindan cultivators. In the eyes of the high-level cultivators, it was just a joke. No one else was willing to come, so she could only look for Lu Xiaoyi. She was one of the few people on the dome who dared to make such an unreasonable request to Lu Hongxian. Lu Xiaoyi did not mind. In fact, he did not dislike this kind of conference. It was never too early to cultivate one's interest. It was normal to start when one was in the foundation establishment stage. According to his theory, even mortals should have some basic knowledge of the universe, let alone cultivators, who were at the top of human wisdom. After all, this was just a learning session. There were no constructive suggestions. He was willing to teach, but he did not want to spend time on 1 + 1 = 2. In any case, one should have some foundation, right? This was the reason why he appeared here. He had caught up, so he came. The universe belongs to everyone. It does not depend on whether you can truly enter it or not. As long as your heart is here, the universe will also reveal the truth to you. The key is imagination. This is the source of all power, the driving force to decipher the mysteries of the universe. You may not have practical experience, but you are not inferior to anyone in terms of imagination. I personally support this conference organized by Senior Sister Yindai. Of course, some stubborn fellows do not think so. What you need to do is to teach them how to slap their faces. The Jindan cultivators cheered loudly. Lu Hongxian was indeed different. He pointed out the crux of the matter with one sentence. That's right, it was to teach them how to slap those stubborn old fellows in the face, even if they were elders. This was Xuanyuan's tradition. Chapter 23:08. Lu Xiaoyi only used one sentence to ignite the competitive spirit of the Jindan. As a result, he was drowned in all kinds of weird nonsense. Lack of basic common sense, lack of basic understanding of the universe, a gap in the realm of Tao, a huge gap in understanding. If all these were combined with their fanaticism, Lu Xiaoyi found himself in the middle of a lunatic's ravings. He felt a little regretful. Had he gone overboard with his words of encouragement? While these guys were encouraging, it seemed like they should be put in a chokehold. Otherwise, they would not have said that the final destination of the 5 rings would be the center of the universe, the land of the yellow dragon. Did they really think that the 5 rings were the only ones in the universe? This confidence was good, but it was a bit too self-righteous. He reaped what he sowed, so other than smiling and encouraging gazes, he could not pour cold water on them. There were too many novel sayings, and almost everyone had their own set of sayings. Most of them were just noise, but he still had to pretend that he was listening attentively. It was hard work. Occasionally, there would be a few who could point out the main points, but these so-called main points had long been within the many judgments of the major cultivators. The so-called flash of inspiration of the Jindan stage cultivators could not escape the careful thinking of the high-level cultivators. This was the truth. Their potential was in the future and not in the present. They could think of refreshing ideas that could solve problems. If that was the case, what was the point of cultivation? Let's see who could fantasize more. Lu Xiaoyi thought so. The most important thing was that they could not lose their motivation to continue fantasizing. This was the true essence of teaching. After 4 hours, the discussion slowly came to an end. The Golden Core cultivators were aware that most of their discussions were nonsense. However, they were grateful that Lu Kuoxian continued to listen to them and chatted with them nonstop. The 100 or so Jin Dan all had their own suggestions, except for one who remained silent. Lu Xiaoyi's principle of doing things was to leave out a group and not leave out a single one. No matter what the reason was, he had to be given a chance. Young friend, I see that you've been thinking hard. Could it be that you've thought of a key point to save the world? Why don't you tell us? No one here will laugh at you. This was a newly minted Jin Dan. He was a little inexperienced, so he was very restrained. He had sneaked in through unorthodox means and did not have the qualifications to enter the seminar. Therefore, he did not dare to speak casually for fear of being chased out. In fact, he was already very satisfied to be able to participate in this and coincidentally see Lu Chuanqi at such a close distance. He didn't care whether he could speak or not, but since Lu Chuanqi asked, he had to answer. Lu Zhu, it may not be my turn to save the world. My current ability is probably only enough to save our village. Everyone laughed. This was a very sensible newcomer. Just a self-deprecating remark was enough to gain everyone's approval. This was actually an extraordinary ability, a potential for great things. In my opinion, we have studied the countless possibilities of the trajectories of the 5 ring continents, including our whimsical imagination and the rational analysis of our seniors. With so many people brainstorming together, it is unlikely that we have missed anything. Then, could it be that there is some special reason that does not follow the normal laws of the celestial bodies? Everyone laughed. It was yet another so-called special, mysterious reason. There were already too many similar theories among them, but their so-called mysteries were actually worthless in the eyes of advanced cultivators. It was because their horizons were not broad enough that they were narrow-minded. When they reached Yuaning, they would know that some of these mysteries were simply normal cosmic phenomena, while some were actually variations of certain cultivation phenomena. It was not surprising. The Tao realm would strip away the veil covering most of the so-called mysteries. Just like a beautiful girl walking on the road, the wind would blow away her veil. Upon closer inspection, it turned out that it was the second daughter of the Wang family next door who was causing trouble. However, Lu Xiaoyi still gave him an encouraging look. He had already heard too many mysteries today, so it didn't matter if he heard one more. At least, this was a chance for this young Jin Dan to prove himself, and not some nonsense he was spouting. The young Jin Dan opened his mouth and then spoke frankly with assurance. We don't know much about mysteries at this realm. Most of them are just wishful guesses and imaginations, but there are occasionally some that are reliable. A few days ago, I went to the young geocentric realm with a few Yuaning martial uncles. Only then did I have a specific understanding of the composition and source of the 5th ring's spiritual opportunity. I heard from the martial uncles that the young geocentric realm and the 5th ring are actually not a whole. Instead, it was formed after a long period of time in the universe. The 5th ring originally did not have such abundant spiritual opportunity. If there was no young geocentric realm, it would at most be an ordinary spiritual opportunity star field. It was precisely because it merged with the young geocentric realm that it became the most famous, top-notch spiritual opportunity star field in the universe. Is there a problem with my understanding? Seeing that everyone was silent, the young Jin Dan licked his lips. I was thinking before the 5th ring became the current 5th ring, what was it like in the ancient times? This young geocentric realm, where did the heart of the spirit vein that is filled with endless spiritual opportunity come from? Was it formed naturally, or was it separated after birth? Was it a core separated from some astronomical phenomenon that we still don't know about? Black hole? White hole? Gray hole? If that's the case, the fusion of the young geocentric realm and the 5th ring may drift forever, constantly changing its trajectory with the gravitational force of various stars in the universe. Perhaps for tens of millions of years, perhaps for hundreds of millions of years, there is no goal and there is no fixed trajectory. However, a new era is about to begin. I heard from the Uncle Masters that many astronomical phenomena are undergoing inexplicable changes. Could this inexplicable change be just because we still lack understanding of the universe? In fact, their changes are still regular, following the most profound, fundamental principles of the universe. Then, is the fifth ring also undergoing changes? Imperceptible influence? Something we didn't notice? For example, the young geocentric realm drifted from the ancient times until now, and finally, because of the arrival of the new era, it wants to go home, towards the hole that nurtured it, no matter what hole it is or what great astronomical phenomenon it is moving towards. If all of these inferences are true, the real danger of the fifth ring may not be a collision. It is a huge energy field in the void. I don't know what will happen when the fifth ring really returns home with a young geocentric realm. Will the fifth ring be devoured? Will the atmosphere disappear? Will the human race go extinct? Will it be the end of the world? Or will it just go home and take a look? Will it continue drifting forever? Everyone is saying that the fifth ring's flight path may be dangerous. Is this a type of threat? No one spoke because this Jean Dan's inference was the most reliable delusion so far, and it was partly true. Everyone looked towards Lu Hongxian. Lu Xiaoyi smiled brightly. What's your name? I don't know if what you said will happen or not, but just based on your words, it's worth me going out to verify it. Chapter 2309. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't just encouraging him. He was really amazed by this idea. This was a very novel angle, and the key was that it was possible. Regarding the fifth ring, regarding the changes in the universe, regarding the origin of the fifth ring, it had its own unique points. It was hard to imagine that this idea came from Jean Dan's mouth. With this starting point, a few large-scale celestial phenomena that would appear in the future of the fifth ring appeared in his mind, including a white hole. Your name? Jean Dan was a little excited and actually forgot to answer Lu Zhu's question. My surname is Go, and my name is Lanzi. Lu Xiaoyi patted his shoulder. Go Lanzi? Good name. You have the potential to destroy the heavens. I think highly of you. As soon as the seminar ended, Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything else and directly rose into the air. His figure flashed, and he appeared in the void. The next moment, he turned into a stream of light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After more than 80 years of searching without slacking off, he knew the celestial phenomena around the future of the fifth ring. If he didn't consider the collision of celestial bodies and only considered large-scale energy field celestial phenomena, there weren't many final choices. After all, it had to be big enough to break down a huge object like the fifth ring's domain. This wasn't something that a small energy field could do. Not to mention the distance. Just within a year's distance, there were 3 such energy fields. One was the Siphon Nebula, one was an abstract energy field, and the other was a white hole. Lu Xiaoyi located these 3 abnormal celestial phenomena in his mind one by one. What made his heart palpitate was that the fifth ring's domain hadn't accelerated or deviated. On one hand, this was because the fifth ring was too big, but on the other hand, it could also be understood as the fifth ring's unwavering trajectory. He hoped it was the former, but he was afraid it was the latter. The 3 celestial phenomena were about the same distance from the fifth ring. He didn't search for them one by one. Time was tight, so he could only go to the one he thought was most likely. Actually, he had been to all 3 celestial phenomena before, but unfortunately, as a dignified half-immortal, he couldn't think as deeply as Jean Dan. The heavens took pity on him, and the heavens treated him well. Go Lanzi had given him a hint. If it had been a few months or half a year later, it would have been too late. Once a fifth ring soul master was pulled into the gravitational field of this energy body, the consequences would be unimaginable. It wasn't as if the great cultivators hadn't considered the effects of these 3 celestial phenomena on the passing fifth ring. He had also made a strict estimation. In the 20,000 years of wandering history of the fifth ring, he had passed through many such gravitational fields, but he had been fine. Because he couldn't pull it. There were many harsh conditions that needed to be met in order to have a fatal attraction to each other. It was not as simple as trying to pull in every male on the street. It depends on your size, appearance, temperament, wealth, age, length, of course. Size was the most important factor. Ordinary gravitational fields were powerless against a massive object like the fifth ring. At most, they could only slightly change its trajectory. Then, the fifth ring would use its enormous inertia to break through the pull of any gravitational field and fly away. This was the case for these three celestial phenomena. After a full field investigation, the great cultivators believed that they did not have such a strong gravitational force at all. They were not even as strong as the gravitational fields of the fifth ring in the 20,000 years of wandering history. That was why they were classified as harmless. But if the fifth ring's young domain was really like this, it was no longer a matter of pure gravitational force, but a matter of the same origin. What Liu Xiaoyi wanted to solve was which celestial phenomenon was of the same origin as the young domain. If it was confirmed, then this should be where the real threat was. This meant that the operation of the fifth ring was not random and aimless. Instead, when the heavenly axiom decided to start a new era, the great Tao began to collapse. At least 20,000 years before Liwia brought Tao down to the lower realm, the fifth ring had already begun to set foot on the road to return home. A little idealistic? It was reasonable for human beings to want to return home when faced with a change, because living beings always had their own feelings and sentiments for their home. Then, did the astral realms have such sentiments too? It shouldn't. Therefore, he still needed to find a deeper reason. For the time being, he was not in a hurry to inform his friends and the higher-ups of the fifth ring. He had already cried wolf once. Before everything was concluded, he did not want to cry wolf a second time. His target, the white hole, was also the place he suspected the most intuitively. When he rode the escape light and sprinted with all his strength, his speed was close to exceeding the limits of human beings. Wherever his escape light passed, space began to distort. This was a kind of escape between the main world and the dimensional space. The principle was to cut space into 4 or 5 dimensions. In such a dimension, the shortest straight line between 2 points in the 3-dimensional space was not the shortest, but there was another curved shortcut. He could only do 4 or 5 dimensions now. When he took another step, he could do 6 or 7 dimensions, or even more. At that time, when he started to escape, his real body in the main world would be almost impossible to see in the main world. It would be another realm. Speed, at his realm, was no longer just about speed. Between 2 points, I could find a line shorter than yours. If one reached the realm of immortals, gold immortals, and Daluo golden immortals could appear in any universe with a raise of their feet. It was just that they did not know whether it was a 100-dimensional or a 1,000-dimensional surface. They could already condense the distance between any 2 points in the universe to the distance of 1 step on a certain surface. That was the limit of vertical escape. At this speed, it took less than a month for him to arrive at the white hole that the fifth ring cultivators called Vitiligo 6. The reason why it was called 6 was because the fifth ring had encountered the 6th white hole in 20,000 years. Vitiligo 6 was still, as usual, quietly hovering in the void of the universe. From afar, it was huge, like a huge colorful mushroom slowly rotating there. Countless magnetic field rays, large and small objects were thrown out by it. It was not a gluttonous snake, but a bubble fish. Based on basic common sense, Liu Xiaoyi did not go deep when he passed by it before. He thought that there was no need to waste time here. However, this time he decided to go deep. In the void of the universe, the big holes in the universe had always been a taboo for cultivators. It was one of the few celestial phenomena that could not be completely explained by cultivation theory. No one knew what would happen if they were pulled into it. Anyway, very few people had tried it. Even if there were really brave people who did not fear death, it was basically a one-way trip. Therefore, when traveling in the universe, cultivators would try to avoid it as much as possible. to prevent accidents from happening. Lu Xiaoyi was the same. In his 3,000 years of cultivation, in theory, he had encountered such celestial phenomena. For example, the inner and outer scenic sky, the no-worries road, and the road of no return. However, those so-called holes were at the end of the hole. They were places that had been modified by great powers. He had never entered an active hole. However, this time he could not stop at just a little. Chapter 23:10. In the land of the Yellow Dragon, thousands of cultivators gathered. In fact, thousands of cultivators could no longer accurately describe the actual number of cultivators here. There was already more than 10,000, so there was no need to count. After Qin Xian left the fifth ring, the first thing he did was to rush to the land of the Yellow Dragon through the interior sky. However, this was not something that could be done in one go. The land of the Yellow Dragon could not be directly projected there. He could only project it to the periphery of the land of the Yellow Dragon. In 20 years, there was no warning from Lu Xiaoyi. This made him feel relieved. There should be no problem, right? More than 80 years had passed. Did he really think that it was a legend? That changes always happened at the last moment of 100 years. He relaxed and arrived at the land of the Yellow Dragon. The scene in front of him made him, a half-immortal who had already experienced countless big scenes, excited. This was the land of the Yellow Dragon, and right above it was the Celestial Court. Of course, it was hidden in countless auspicious clouds, making it unreachable. At first, he thought that these auspicious clouds were naturally gathered because of the existence of the Celestial Court. Later, he found out from Lu Xiaoyi that these things were actually created by people who flattered him. Whitewashing, faking, and exaggerating were everywhere. If the Celestial Court was like this, how could there be anything else? Therefore, the power and packaging that the old guys and his family talked about were not completely unreasonable. Having an old man in the family was like having a treasure. He could see more clearly than the young people. Under the auspicious clouds, the space was extremely vast. It was the size of dozens of ordinary universes. It was enough to accommodate no matter how many cultivators gathered. However, if one wanted to set up a monument, it could only be at the most central part of the universe. A three-dimensional universe space with a round top and a round bottom. Was this what it meant? Cultivators could not directly enter this circular universe space. If they wanted to enter, they had to do two things. First, they had to propose the meaning of the Great Tao to the circular universe. After approval, they could enter and set up a monument. Second, they had to go in and look at other people's Great Tao monuments. As long as they penetrated their spiritual power into the monument, they would turn into a rainbow and enter the monument. However, they would not stop outside the circular world. Under such rules, there were tens of thousands of cultivators gathered outside the circular world. However, inside the circular world, there were only 1,000 or so Tao tablets standing alone. However, how many people were inside the Tao tablets was another matter. He had been ordered by the three clear orthodoxies of the universe to erect the tombstone, and there was a time limit. Of course, the time limit was not too strict, and he was still given the opportunity to observe the other tombstones. He only needed to erect his heavenly tribulation Great Tao tombstone within 10 years. Before that, of course, he had to take a good look at the specific situation in the surrounding world. The 1,000 Tao tablets still had the 36 innate Taos as the main ones. For example, there were dozens of 5 elements Taos and quite a number of yin-yang Taos. None of the 36 Taos were left out. This was the conservative way of thinking. With the mature Taos as the foundation, and with the changes in the universe, the Taos became the 5 elements, yin-yang, and innate Taos. When the epoch changed, these great Taos of the same origin would compare with each other and finally decide on the 5 elements, yin, yang, and so on, that were most suitable for the new epoch. This was the conservative party, or it could also be called the natural party. The rest were the reformists and radicals. There were relatively few of them now, because most of them were in a wait-and-see state. However, As the new epoch approached, those strange great Daos were bound to spring up like bamboo shoots. It was just that it was not obvious yet. Even now, there were a few new great Daos. The more famous ones were Pure Yang, Blood River, Netherworld, Life, and so on. Here, Qing Xian did not see Shi and Yin Chang. Presumably, with their impatient tempers, it was impossible for them to have been watching others erect Daos for so many years. They definitely could not hold back and wanted to do it themselves. Shi must have erected the great Tao of life. There were 2 Tao tablets of life in the circular world, and one of them must belong to Shi. Outside, he could not distinguish it for the time being. He needed to go in and explore to understand. Yin Chang's great Tao was reincarnation. There were many of them. Qing Xian counted carefully and found that there were 8 or 9 of them. It was troublesome to find them, but he had to find them. At least, he had to know where his friends were. He had to find Shi first because it was easier. He had to choose one of the 2. If he was lucky, he would only need to do it once. After finding Shi, it was very easy to find Yin Chang. The 2 of them should know each other. Qing Xian did not hesitate. He had limited time. He concentrated his spirit on one of the Tao tablets of life, and his body immediately disappeared. He went in a bit early because after he left, the other half-immortals beside him faintly transmitted their words. One of the half-immortals laughed and said, "Senior Marshall Brothers, you came? Senior Marshall Brothers, we found out after entering and exiting the Tao tablets that the Tao tablets of this circular world can isolate all external information. Therefore, if you Senior Marshall Brothers have any warning objects, it is best to leave it on one of the Senior Marshall Brothers outside. Otherwise, once you go in, you won't be able to receive anything." White hole. It was a jet source in the universe. It could provide matter and energy to the external region. However, it could not absorb any matter and radiation from the external region. Therefore, white hole was a special cosmic celestial body that only emitted and did not absorb. It was the exact opposite of a black hole. It was a strong gravitational source. Its external gravitational properties were the same as a black hole. White hole could absorb the surrounding matter to form a matter layer. It was precisely because it only emitted and did not absorb that the vigilance of cultivators towards white hole was very limited. Lu Xiaoyi began to approach this white hole. What made him feel a little relieved was that compared to the most famous black hole in the universe, this white hole was just a little brother. Its volume had not reached the point where it could frighten people. With his current ability as a half-immortal, entering it was not a problem. The only problem was how deep he could go. How deep? It depended on whether he could get rid of the gravitational field of the white hole. The closer he got and the deeper he went, the stronger the gravitational force would be. When it was so strong that he almost could not control his strength and would be firmly sucked in a boundary layer, it should be the time for him to leave. From afar, the white hole did not seem big. When he got closer and closer, the big rotating mushroom plate came pressing down on him. He was like an ant crawling in a boundless desert. At this moment, humans seemed so small. But he knew he had come to the right place. When he really entered the periphery of the white hole and did not look at it from afar, the warning in his heart became more and more obvious. It was not his fault that he swallowed everything in his previous patrol. It was impossible for him to enter the celestial state one by one. It was not enough even after many years. He could only pass by from afar, judge, consider, and then leave after he had explored a few places. This should be it, right? Although he had not completely figured out the ins and outs, he quickly warned his friends, including Shishi's funny 5 hairs talisman. He did not deliberately warn the 5th ring. It was not time yet. When his friend arrived, they would have enough time to inform the 5th ring. Don't eat alone. He did not forget Qing Xian's advice. Chapter 23:11. After sending the message, Lu Xiaoyi felt that he was prepared. He believed that his friends were better than the group of 5th ring cultivators. After all, there was a difference in realms. Some things cannot be solved with more people. For example, this white hole, could it be filled with more people? He controlled his speed and cut towards the center of the huge mushroom cloud. Only at the center could he better understand the inner workings of the white hole and understand the danger it posed to the fifth ring cultivators. How could it threaten the fifth ring cultivators? This was the natural desire for knowledge as a cultivator. He had to understand the mechanism before he could find a solution. After all, this thing was not a physical planet. He could not achieve his goal by destroying it violently. The mushroom cloud was too big, hundreds of millions of miles. As he slowly approached the center of the mushroom cloud, he could clearly feel the strong gravitational force on his body. However, he could completely withstand it. Although he was still an ant, he was still a relatively strong ant in the origin world. There were some vague feelings, but they were still uncertain. Therefore, he began to walk deeper into the mushroom, plunging into the mushroom core. Only by digging deeper would he be able to see more of what was going on. When he really went in, he could clearly feel a faint power. It was not in the strength of the gravitational force, but a change close to the essence. This white hole was mutating. But what was the direction of mutation? He could choose to leave and look for people. But the problem was that even if he found people, he still could not solve the problem of the white hole's transformation. To put it bluntly, even if he found people, he still had to go in to find the answer because his realm was the highest and he was the strongest. There was also the problem of time. If he went back and forth to look for people, a few months would pass. He still did not know what changes would happen to the white hole. The distance between the fifth ring and the white hole was less than a year. He was not willing to waste precious time on the journey back and forth. 3,000 years of cultivation had given him incomparable confidence. Even if he did not need others to package him, he would still be the savior, not only the fifth ring cultivator, but also the universe. Therefore, he continued to go deeper and deeper. As he went deeper, he obtained more and more information. Fortunately, he now had more than half of the Sciention Dao and had a deep understanding of the Sciention 5 manifestations. In the process, he finally understood what kind of disaster the fifth ring cultivators would encounter. In this cultivation world, there are many proven theories about the universe, including the 4 holes of the universe. One of the most important points was that a white hole was actually the inverse of a black hole. There was a 3-dimensional channel between a black hole and a white hole. One could enter from the black hole and exit from the white hole. The passageway that connected them was a wormhole. The road of no return was a half-abandoned wormhole. These 3 holes were like a sewer connected to the mouth and the door, forming the most famous spectacle in the universe. However, there was another important theory, which was that black holes and white holes could be interchanged under certain circumstances. In other words, if a person were to stand upside down, the rigid door would become the mouth, and the mouth would become the rigid door. The key wasn't the reversal of the door and the mouth, but the fact that when the fifth ring passed through here, they originally thought that they were passing through a safe door that could only pull but not swallow. But in the end, it suddenly became a mouth that could only swallow and not pull. This was going to kill him. At present, he still couldn't determine whether the fifth ring's young realm was spat out from here in ancient or immemorial times. It was no longer important. What was important was that the will of the universe decided to spit out back then and how it wanted to swallow it now. The young realm came from here, and this place changed into a black hole. This was the misfortune of the fifth ring. After figuring out the process, the next step was how to avoid it. Although the white hole didn't look much different from normal on the surface, the conversion between a black hole and a white hole wasn't an extremely slow process like ordinary astronomical phenomena. It could easily take millions of years. The black and white holes couldn't change even a little bit. They didn't have such a mechanism. Because the flow of matter was always flowing in and out, the role change between them might be very short. Even if it wasn't an instant, it would be compressed into a few days, or even a day, or even shorter. After a long time, the wormhole wouldn't be able to hold on and collapse, and the black hole and white hole would have no foundation to exist. It was precisely because he wasn't sure when the roles of the black hole and White Hole would change that he couldn't easily leave here. Only by staying here could he have a chance to prevent such a role change. Lu Xiaoyi quickly understood his current situation. Changing the trajectory of the fifth ring? Impossible. The trajectory of the fifth ring could only be adjusted slightly. It was meaningless to adjust it now. Notifying the cultivators of the fifth ring? It was also meaningless. No matter how many people came, only one could come in and change the conversion process through the Tao state. This wasn't a matter of working together. It could only be him. So it was meaningless to notify them or not. Should he evacuate the fifth ring's population? That was even more impossible. Tens of billions of people were not tens of billions of insects that could fly. Even if he used all the floating rafts that could be used in the fifth ring, how many people could he carry at one time? Tens of thousands? Hundreds of thousands? A cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. It would only add to the chaos. The only people who might be able to help him in the Tao state were a few half-immortal friends. Shi and Yin Cheng were still not enough. Only Qing Xian might be able to play a few tricks. After preparing for nearly 100 years and searching for nearly 100 years, in the end, he still ended up in a situation where he was fighting alone. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But no matter what, he still had to thank Simbai. How did this guy know that the fifth ring would face such a tribulation? He must have obtained it when he was in the immortal court. Otherwise, no one would have such a view and vision of the universe. After thinking clearly about the gains and losses, he no longer hesitated. The only thing left was to solve the problem of the conversion between the black hole and the white hole. If he succeeded, he would forget about everything. If he failed, he would forget about everything. He didn't feel that the burden of tens of billions of people was too heavy. He tried his best. It was just life and death. After going around and around, he still had to return to the Tao state. What kind of Tao state was most suitable for this kind of environment? If it was only about the 36 innate Tao, then it must be the essence of the universe, the 5 grand Tao state. But in the changes of the universe and the impatience before the change of era, the ancient 5 grand Tao state might not be able to keep up with the situation. If the 5 grand Tao was still in charge, such a strange conversion between the black hole and the white hole was unlikely to succeed. So he still decided to use his newly researched devour. Black hole, wasn't it devouring? After understanding all this, in the depths of the white hole's mushroom cloud, he spread out the devour Tao state and looked for a point of convergence with the white hole's operation. He was deeply immersed in the 3 subversive great Taos of the future new era. He didn't let any of them go. It was to ensure that nothing would go wrong at the crucial moment. Now, it was time to test the quality of his devour Tao. Chapter 23:12. P.S. Sir D. Duo's new book, Reboot 99. Everyone is welcome to enjoy, vote, and collect it. At the Dome, the Jean Dan happily dispersed. They saw Lu Zhu in outer space. Obviously, he really went to outer space to find the possible home of the young realm. With this judgment, everyone was more envious of Go Lanzi. It was hard for Lu Zhu not to be successful. One after another, they came over to congratulate him. Even if they were sword cultivators, they still understood the ways of the world. Although they were reckless, they still needed to be a little cunning. Didn't you see the temperament of Ancestor Li in the past and Ancestor Lu now? They were not just practicing swordsmanship. Therefore, a golden core cultivator asked, "What do you think? If Lu Zhu really discovered something, wouldn't the Fifth Ring Navigation Route Association have made a great contribution? But what I'm worried about is that Lu Zhu went alone. Will he be in any danger?" Another Jean Dan nodded. That's right. If it's a spiritual cultivator, needless to say, Lu Zhu can even kill immortals. What can threaten him? But now his opponent is a heavenly phenomenon cultivator. I think we shouldn't just ignore it. We can't go out. Why don't we inform the martial uncles and let them decide what to do? These Jean Dan swordsmen were all quick-witted and meticulous. They were the backbone of the lower middle class of the Dome. No one was stupid. They were calm and cautious. Therefore, 100 people found a Yuanying martial uncle with a high position and told him the truth. This Yuanying didn't dare to be negligent. In the dome, everything about Lu Zhu was not to be taken lightly. He knew the truth of the dome. He didn't look for anyone else. He directly found one of the perfected cultivators closest to Lu Zhu, Song Rong. When Song Rong heard this, even though this matter was still inconclusive, but this theory and Lu Shi's temper, as his closest disciple, he had followed him from Zhou Xian to this place and had long treated him as a teacher. He knew a little about Lu Shi's true intentions for staying in the fifth ring. Therefore, the group of true sovereigns who were closest to Lu Xiaoyi also knew about this matter, and the news spread quickly. They did not believe in Go Lanzi's fantasies. But if even Lu Zhu was willing to personally make a trip for this, it meant that there must be something they did not understand. But the question was, with several such celestial phenomena, where would Lu Zhu go? Guandu opened a star map and said resolutely, "It's too far. Don't worry about it. The emphasis should be placed on the nearby ones." Now it seemed that there were only 3 suspicious celestial phenomena: the Siphon Nebula, the abstract force field, and the white hole. I knew that Little wanted to get to the bottom of things first, but some things are always wrong, and the timing may not be perfect. This is related to the fifth ring, so we can't be too careful. As for why Little E is staying here, even if he doesn't say it, we can guess. Then let's send out all the monarchs, split into 3 groups, and go to 3 different places to see where Little E is. Also inform the 3 pure ones and the supreme ones that we can't hide this kind of thing. We can't blindly care about our own face. For the safety of the fifth ring, what's wrong with being slapped in the face again? This time, it's my decision to move out. I'm not afraid of being slapped in the face. The Dome Swordsman monarchs rose into the sky. They were also very clear that Yuanying was very limited in dealing with celestial phenomena, and it was not good to make a big fuss about it. Lu Shi's speed was too fast, and they could not even do half of it, let alone Yuanying. The 3 groups split into 3 arrowheads, breaking through the sky at full speed. They were also very curious as to why Lu Shi was so persistent about the fifth ring. Was something really going to happen? No one knew, but no matter who it was, as long as they thought about the nearly 10 billion people on the fifth ring, a kind of fear would arise spontaneously. Lu Xiaoyi activated the devouring Tao state, allowing himself to fully match the changes in the rhythm of the white hole. Of course, there was also the faint black hole at the other end of the wormhole. He could feel that the changes in the rhythm of the black hole and the white hole were becoming more and more consistent, and the resonance caused by the wormhole was becoming more and more obvious. This meant that when the resonance reached a certain level, the black hole and the white hole would continue to swap roles. The one that appeared near the fifth ring was a black hole with its mouth wide open, and the fifth ring was flying there without hesitation. But at this time, he felt that his Tao state was a little unable to keep up with the frequency of the resonance. It was not that his Tao state was not enough, but that he was too far away from the black hole. If he wanted to change this situation, he could not only use his Tao state of the mushroom cloud of the white hole, but also go to the wormhole and think of a solution between the black hole and the white hole. In other words, he had to enter the interior of an active white hole or black hole. How long had the last person who did this been dead for? However, the last person who did this was also not in the midst of the changes in the epic. Lu Xiaoyi did not think that he would definitely die if he went in. It was not because of how strong he was, but because of the changes in the universe brought about by the change in the epic. What was stable would become chaotic, and what was safe would become dangerous. Then what would become of the 9 deaths and 1 life? Would it become 9 deaths and 1 death? The universe was like this, always giving you difficult problems. Should you face them bravely or avoid them? He did not seem to have a choice. It was all disguised as a saint. Lu Xiaoyi spat and plunged deeper without hesitation. Once again, he had forced himself into a desperate situation. He could not remember how many times it had been. He seemed to have gotten used to it a long time ago. Every time he was in a desperate situation, his thoughts would always be exceptionally sharp, and his inspiration would no longer appear suddenly. Instead, it would flash nonstop. He was like gunpowder, and only in an explosion would he show his greatest power. What the hell is going on? Isn't it just changing the immortal court? Do they have to make things so difficult for me? And even bring along my own realm? Lu Xiaoyi complained as he plunged deeper. He completely penetrated the mushroom cloud of the white hole and followed a pipe forward. He could not go back now. As for the direction, actually, it was very easy to determine. He just needed to follow the direction of the aura coming from the black hole. Just like crawling the intestines, the direction of the stench would definitely be the door, and the direction of the garlic would definitely be the mouth. It would never be wrong. His six senses had been completely sealed. In the winding wormhole, the surging energy from the direction of the black hole constantly washed over his body, like a jet shot out from a particle accelerator. Realizing that death was approaching, his inspiration began to shine again. Thus, he had the most ridiculous response in history. He opened his mouth, released his sphincter, and turned himself into the trinity of the black hole, wormhole, and white hole. This kind of energy transformation was unbearable, but he had to do it. If he did not do so, he would instantly die in the energy wash. He was only a half immortal, not an immortal. If he had to transform his body, then he would change it into the trinity of the black hole. It just so happened that he realized the weakness of his body when he clashed head-on with the immortal rock. He might as well take this opportunity. This kind of body refinement was extremely tragic. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.